Chapter 521. The Wooden City, Part 2. Elmuish, the Wooden City, manifested a strange charm, perceivable from the moment one stepped into it. The entire city was built from timber, but not just any wood. This was wood infused with soul essence over long periods of time, giving it strength and durability far beyond its natural state. Every structure in the city, from the grandest hall to the humblest home, was crafted from the same enchanted wood. Its surface was polished smooth and shone with a faint, ethereal glow. The streets of Elmuish were paved not with stone, but with wooden planks cut and fitted so perfectly that they seemed to meld together like pieces of a grand puzzle. Overhead, wooden bridges and walkways stretched between buildings, creating a labyrinthine network of paths above the ground where pedestrians could move without disturbing the hustle and bustle below. The buildings themselves were masterpieces of craftsmanship, their walls carved with intricate patterns that told the history of Elmuish and the ancient kingdom of Sassex. Tall spires and towers rose up like trees in a forest, each adorned with swirling engravings of animals, plants, and mythical creatures. Many of the structures resembled giant trees themselves, their walls textured to mimic bark, while their rooftops curved gracefully, resembling the branches of an ancient oak. The air was filled with the earthy scent of wood and sap, and the faint, ever-present sound of creaking timber added to the city's unique atmosphere. Despite its wooden construction, the city never felt fragile. Instead, it radiated a feeling of resilience, as though it had grown from the earth itself and would endure as long as the trees that surrounded it. From the point of entry all the way to the harbor, the city was a marvelous sight to behold. Northern was certain there would be at least some metal. To his dismay, however, there was not a single sighting of metal. "How can this be?" Northern lamented, his voice thick with disbelief. "Every single structure was built of wood. I get that there's an abundance of wood in this place, but seriously, what's the deal with everything being built from it? Even the knights, wooden armor. What if they get stabbed by metal?" "The armor is stronger than most plated armors," Alistron explained, smiling as they walked through the street. "The wood has been reinforced by soul essence over centuries. It has a resilience that ordinary wood shouldn't have." Alistron continued, his tone lighter as he gestured to their surroundings. "The abundance of wood here led Sassex to maximize its use, reducing the need to spend financially on other resources when their uncommon wood could make up for it. In conjunction with that, their wood trade is very limited. In fact, it's not one of the main sources of the country's finances." "That's odd," Northern said, furrowing his brow. "Why would a country this rich in a material others don't have not be making a fortune from it?" Alistron chuckled, his smile deepening as he glanced around the bustling streets of Elmuish, his hands clasped behind his back. "That's because the wood from Sassex is sacred," he explained. "They believe selling it in large quantities would diminish its power. It's not just a commodity to them. It's a gift from the ancient forests. This isn't ordinary wood. It holds significance that transcends wealth." Northern furrowed his brow further, glancing up at the towering wooden spires above them. "Sacred or not, I still can't wrap my head around it," he muttered, his gaze moving over the knights patrolling the streets in their wooden armor. "If it's this powerful, shouldn't they be dominating the trade markets? They'd be unstoppable." Alistron shrugged. "Perhaps, but that's not the Sassex way. Their wealth isn't measured in coin but in tradition and the preservation of their heritage. What you see here," he gestured at the wooden structures around them, "is a testament to their respect for the land. Their connection to nature runs deep, and they'd never risk losing that bond for the sake of riches." Northern remained skeptical, but he couldn't deny the strange charm of the city. The architecture was unlike anything he'd ever seen before, and despite its complete reliance on wood, the city had a strength and mystique that were palpable. "So, they're rich in spirit," Northern said sarcastically, kicking a small pebble along the wooden street. "That doesn't help them when they need to put food on the table, though, does it?" Alistron chuckled again, shaking his head. "You underestimate them, Northern. Sassex has other ways of maintaining its wealth. Their influence isn't rooted in trade alone. Their resources extend far beyond what you see here. And don't be fooled by the wooden buildings and armor. This city is not as vulnerable as it appears. There is a strange spell art infused in every structure, in every knight's armor. It's far more powerful than you might think. Northern's curiosity was piqued despite himself. Spell arts, huh? You mean to tell me this whole city is enchanted? Alistran nodded. Indeed, the soul essence that flows through the wood is constantly rejuvenating it, making it stronger with time. It's alive in a way. Harm could come to Elmuish, but it would be like trying to cut down a tree with bare hands. You might leave a mark, but the tree will heal and continue to grow. Northern fell silent for a moment, considering Alistran's words. So, no metal, he said finally. But soul essence flows through every plank and every beam. This city is practically alive, isn't it? In a sense, yes, Alistran replied. And that's precisely why Sassex doesn't trade their wood. They'd be trading away their lifeblood. Northern glanced at the nearest knight, his wooden armor gleaming in the faint sunlight. Still, it's strange to me, he admitted. Wooden armor, wooden buildings, a wooden city that's somehow stronger than steel. I've never seen anything like it. You won't, Alistran said. Not anywhere else in the world. Elmuish is one of a kind. Northern sighed, shaking his head in disbelief. Well, I guess it's growing on me. Shin smiled as he watched Northern and Alistran converse deeply, feeling somewhat impressed and at peace with the air between the two of them. After a few more minutes of walking, they reached the city airport. Chapter 522. To Arcadia. It was hard to believe that, in a place like this, there would be an airport for airships. If he hadn't already been told and couldn't hear the faint hum of energy and the rhythmic creaking of wooden platforms in the distance, Northern wouldn't have believed it. Even with all the anticipation, Northern's jaw still dropped as they approached the airport. He paused for a moment, taking in the sight before him. It wasn't the sprawling metallic monstrosity he had known. No, here the airport felt like it had grown from the city itself, much like the rest of Elmuish. Towering, twisted wooden pillars rose from the earth, their surfaces polished and intricately carved, stretching high into the sky. They resembled ancient trees, their tops spreading out into wide platforms where the airships docked. The docks themselves were suspended in the air by what seemed to be sheer will and the subtle shimmer of soul essence. Thick ropes of enchanted wood, resembling vines, anchored the platforms to the ground, ensuring their stability even as heavy airships hovered above. The ships, majestic in their own right, seemed dwarfed by the magnitude of the airport's organic design. Their hulls gleamed with polished wood, blending seamlessly with the ethereal glow of the surrounding structures. Not what you expected? Alistran's voice was laced with amusement. Northern shook his head. I don't know what I expected. Maybe more wood. Alistran chuckled. Look closer. Northern squinted, and as his eyes adjusted to the subtle lighting, he realized the docks themselves were laced with glowing lines of soul essence, flowing through the wood like veins in a living creature. The entire structure pulsed with life, constantly regenerating and adapting to the demands of the airships that came and went. The air was alive with activity. Crews rushing to and from their vessels, passengers waiting in clusters, their voices blending into a low hum. Above, a series of wooden walkways crisscrossed the sky, connecting the platforms like bridges between branches in a vast forest. The sails of the airships flapped in the breeze, their designs blending elegance with practicality, as they bobbed gently in place, ready for their next journey. Still no metal, huh? Northern muttered half to himself. How do these things even stay in the air? Alistran grinned. Soul essence, of course. It's woven into everything here. Even the airships use it, lighter than air, yet stronger than steel. They're bound to the wind and the will of the one who commands them. Northern exhaled slowly, shaking his head in disbelief. The complexity of weaving soul essence into runes, empowering the wood with extraordinary abilities, amazed him. Northern had studied runes for a while and knew they were essentially a form of language in Trail. But from what he had surmised, lacing them with soul essence wasn't entirely impossible. It just depended on the person crafting them. This only heightened Northern's curiosity about the crafters and builders of Elmuish, and Sassex as a whole, even more than the city itself. After some thought, he finally turned to ask his guide, "Alistran, how are the builders of Sassex able to put something like this together? Do they have some hidden talent?" Alistran shrugged, lightening the weight of Northern's question with a slightly dismissive expression. "What can I say? I guess they've just grown too accustomed to the nature of the wood. Think about it, wood has been an integral part of their culture for ages. Wouldn't it make sense that over time, their crafters would have developed some secret, amazing abilities?" Northern stared at him for a moment, then deadpanned, "So you don't know?" "Not like that." Alistran scratched his cheek, looking away. "I've actually never thought about it. It's fine. I didn't expect much. I'm just a little surprised because you seem to know so much already." "What do you mean by that?" "Hey, brat. It's wrong to talk like that to your elder." Ignoring him, Northern asked, "How do you know so much about this city anyway? Are you from Elmuish?" "Me? No. It just so happens that I frequent this city more than others. It has a unique airship drive that channels to almost every nation in the Central Plains, even Riamgard." Northern felt his heart thump differently when he heard Riamgard. He exhaled, dismissing whatever he had just felt, and focused on the present. "So, where do we go from here, and how?" "Follow me. Arcadia awaits." Northern, Shin, and Ryan followed Alistran through the bustling airship docks, the hum of the wooden structures vibrating beneath their feet as they wove through clusters of travelers. Northern's eyes lingered on the shimmering airships, each one uniquely adorned, their sails catching the wind with quiet elegance. The crowd thinned slightly as they approached a grand wooden pavilion nestled near the edge of the platform. Above it, a large sign was carved into the polished beams, "Elmuish Airship Bureau." Alistran strode confidently toward one of the counters, waving casually at the guards who gave him only a passing glance. It was clear he was no stranger to this place. Northern, on the other hand, was still trying to take it all in. The intricacies of the bureau were a wonder in themselves. Desks carved from the same enchanted wood, pulsing faintly with soul essence, and glowing runes etched into the surface, constantly shifting as though alive. A bored-looking clerk sat behind the desk, flicking through a series of papers. He barely glanced up when Alistran approached. "Heading to Persone?" the clerk asked, his tone flat but familiar. "No, not this time. I'm going to Arcadia," Alistran replied with a grin, his hands resting on the counter. "And I'm bringing guests." Behind the old joker's grin, Northern could swear he saw hints of suppressed anger. The clerk finally looked up, his gaze shifting toward Northern with mild interest. "Arcadia, huh?" He raised an eyebrow. "I don't think you've been there in a while, have you?" "The streets of Arcadia are unforgettable. Like it or not, I'm drawn there. Please give us 4 tickets." Alistran finished with 4 fingers pointed at the clerk. Northern remained quiet, watching Alistran handle the exchange with interest. It was strange to think that someone as inconspicuous as Alistran had connections, though he supposed that was part of his charm, never revealing more than necessary. "How soon are you planning to leave?" the clerk asked, drawing a few runes on the counter. The inscriptions glowed briefly before fading again. Northern discreetly observed the clerk's hands until Alistran leaned in slightly, blocking his view. "As soon as you can get us on board." The clerk hummed thoughtfully, tapping his chin before glancing at a glowing panel beside him. "Next ship to Arcadia departs in 2 hours." Alistran nodded. "Perfect." The clerk reached under the counter, pulling out 4 wooden tokens, each intricately carved with the emblem of Elmuish and glowing faintly with a soft blue light. He slid them across the counter. "These will get you on board. You know the drill. 2nd-tier platform, follow the guidelines, and present these to the boarding officer." Alistran scooped up the tokens and handed one to each member of the group. They inspected them for a moment. The craftsmanship was stunning, smooth to the touch yet imbued with a strange power that thrummed against Northern's fingertips. "Thanks, old man," Alistron said with a wink. The clerk rolled his eyes, waving them off as he returned to his paperwork. Soon after, they reached the designated platform where a small group of passengers had already gathered, each holding similar tokens. A tall figure wearing a wooden breastplate, decorated with more soul-etched designs, stood by the boarding gate, checking tickets with casual authority. Alistron flashed his token first, and the boarding officer merely nodded before gesturing for them to proceed. Northern presented his own token, and for a moment, the officer's eyes lingered on him. There was no recognition, no suspicion, just the brief acknowledgement of a newcomer. The officer placed a hand over the runes on Northern's ticket, and they flared briefly with light before fading. "Welcome aboard," the officer said in a gruff voice, stepping aside to let him pass before turning to the rest of the group. Northern followed Alistron onto the wooden walkway leading to the airship. He took a deep breath, feeling a strange sense of anticipation as the wind swept through his hair. Above them, the majestic airship awaited, its sails unfurling slowly, shimmering under the gentle glow of the city's light. He glanced at Alistron. "What's Arcadia like?" Alistron smiled, though there was a touch of mystery in his eyes. "You'll see soon enough. It's not a place easily put into words." Chapter 523. The Takeoff. As Northern and his group stepped onto the airship, the crew began moving around with practiced efficiency, adjusting the sails and checking the glowing runes that lined the ship's edges. The air was filled with the sounds of creaking wood and soft commands, blending into the steady hum of activity. Shin and Ryan stood beside him, both casting curious glances around the ship, though Shin's calm demeanor betrayed little of his thoughts. Ryan, on the other hand, seemed captivated by every little thing he saw on the ship. It made Northern wonder if he had never been on an airship before. But that was impossible. They had all been in one before being sent to the Dark Continent. Northern sighed and looked away. Now that he thought about it, he realized he didn't know much about Ryan, aside from the fact that he was silent most of the time and had an insanely broken talent that allowed him to control ice. "I wonder what his profile is like." Northern blinked once, his mouth dropping slightly as Ryan's soul profile manifested as letters on panels before his eyes. Profile. Name Ryan Johnson. True name, Frozen Flames. Attributes, Ice and Fire. Soul rank, Vagrant. Soul core saturation, Mid. Talent, Frostheart. Talent class, SSS. Talent ability, Ice manipulation, Shards of Ice. Ice Meteor. There it is. That broken ability that costs 5,000 fragments. Damn. I want it so bad? Or should I just save for it? Northern was faced with the dilemma once again. It was like he wanted something so badly, but he couldn't afford it because he was just so broke. Ryan's ice ability was so powerful, and considering Northern's talents were more related to fire, it would be a huge step up. He stood frozen for a while, staring at Ryan's soul profile, particularly his talent. Then something clicked in his mind. Wait, that's true. If I choose not to use all my talents, I get 1,000 talent fragments for each unused slot. If I leave 5 slots empty, that's 5,000 talent fragments. I'd be able to get it. But then a question followed. Would it be worth it? Sacrificing 5 talents for one ability was a lot, but at the same time, Ryan's ability was worth more than 5 low-level talents, not to mention the potential it held. Yet, while Northern wanted it badly because of how powerful it was, he began to ask himself if it suited his playstyle. Should I go copying every goddamn talent out there just because I can? Or should I focus on talents that fit my style and create a synergy with my true essence? Somehow, the ice ability didn't seem to fit. If he could obtain it without sacrificing 5 slots, maybe it would have been different. But sacrificing 5 slots meant giving up 5 potential talents that could merge well with Void and Chaos to create a synergy far beyond Ryan's ice ability. Even with all these thoughts surfacing, Northern still craved the damn talent. He sighed. I don't have to decide immediately. Let's not think too much about it. He dismissed the sole profile and looked around. The ship seemed to be preparing to set sail, and most of the passengers were already inside. However, a few still lingered around the deck, including Alistron, who leaned casually against the railing, arms crossed as he gazed out over the city below. He seemed completely at ease, as though this was just another routine journey for him. The sails above began to unfurl slowly, each one catching the light breeze that swept through the docks. They shimmered faintly, the threads of soul essence woven into their fabric glowing as they caught the wind. "Brace yourselves," Alistron said over his shoulder without looking at Northern. His voice was barely loud enough to hear over the increasing noise of the ship's preparations. The liftoff's always a bit jarring for first-timers. Jarring? How jarring could it be? I've been on a ship before. Northern's eyes narrowed slightly as he felt a shift in the air. The hum beneath his feet grew stronger, the wooden deck vibrating in time with the pulsing energy of the ship. He glanced over at the thick ropes that still anchored them to the platform, watching as the runes etched into the wood began to glow brighter. Then, with a sudden, almost imperceptible lurch, the ship began to rise. The sensation was unlike anything Northern had experienced. Now that he thought about it, he'd never experienced a ship's takeoff before. The first and only airship he had been on, he was teleported into it midair. At the very least, Northern had expected a jerking movement, something that would throw him off his feet. Instead, it was smooth, like being lifted by an invisible hand. The airship gracefully ascended toward the sky. The ropes that had anchored them snapped free, recoiling back to the dock as the ship floated higher and higher. Northern gripped the railing, his eyes widening as the platform beneath them shrank away. The city of Elmuish spread out below, its twisted wooden structures and towering pillars fading into the distance as they climbed into the clouds. The air grew cooler, and the wind whistled through the sails. The hum of the ship's energy grew steadier now, matching the rhythm of the wind. Northern exhaled slowly, his grip on the railing loosening as he took in the view below. For a moment, the world seemed small, like a distant memory fading into the background. Alistron walked to his side, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "First time on an airship, eh?" he asked without looking over. Northern lingered for a moment before nodding. "Yeah, apparently." Alistron chuckled. "Pretty smooth, ain't it?" "Not what I expected. It's different. That's the beautiful thing about wooden-built ships." Alistron smirked, taking out a pipe and igniting it with a thin black rod that birthed a spark. "You'll get used to it. The skies have a way of making everything down there feel insignificant." Northern didn't respond, his eyes still locked on the shrinking city below. For a brief moment, he blanked out, his foresight called by the chaos ahead in the timeline. His eyes regained focus almost immediately, and his expression darkened. "Boy, something wrong? Should I tell him or should I not?" Chapter 524. The Hijackers, Part 1. Northern leaned on the rails of the airship, observing the gentle clouds as it glided through them, flowing with the current of the winds. It was almost as if the ship was alive. The gentle hums made it feel like they were riding on a wooden vessel built upon the back of a floating abomination. Sometimes Northern didn't want to believe this was a kind of vessel that had soul essence flowing through its veins. It sort of made it a living organism, although thinking about it crowned his head with aches. He already had something to deal with, and that was the chaos he had seen. He narrowed his eyes as he inspected the clouds of the sky, remembering what he saw. For a couple of seconds after he saw it, he had pondered over whether to tell anyone or not. But telling anybody would mean giving himself away. The whole event was a shocker to begin with, but it was going to cause a major drift in their journey. They were going to crash because of it, and the continuation of his journey would suddenly be made difficult. Hence, he was baffled as to how he could deal with this, how he could deal with airship hijackers. Northern grimaced a little bit. Then he leaned away from the rails, walking over to one of the sailors. "Excuse me, sir." The man, looking like he was in his late 40s, with lines of aging stretching across his face here and there where they needed to be, responded, "Young man, Do you need something? What are the dangers of flying on an airship? The man did not look surprised by Northern's question. Instead, he smiled like it was a normal thing, saying, "This must be your first flight." Kind of. Northern responded blankly. He was too interested in the man's response to care about the politeness or even reciprocate it. Didn't mean that he was rude, however. Well, there are a lot of things that can hinder our journey. The greatest hindrance of them all is the weather. Although devices to help predict the unlikely behavior of the storms have been developed, sometimes the readings and predictions could go wrong. But this rarely happens, so I assure you, young man, you are on a safe ride. Northern stared squarely at the man for a couple of seconds, suppressing the irritation he felt. The man probably thought he was asking out of fear and felt the need to answer the emotion rather than the question, which pissed Northern off greatly. But still, he shoved his emotion aside and pressed, "What are the chances of hijacking?" The man's face froze for a second, his mouth slightly agape as he looked at Northern again, silent for a couple of seconds before he started his response. "Young man," his voice rang, "hijacking is not something that we just come across every now and then. You really do not need to be worried about it." "He is doing it again," Northern grimaced. "You are not answering my question." Seeing the dark expression on Northern's face, the man shivered a little, stuttering as he reaffirmed to Northern, "I can assure you that there wouldn't be any dangers in this journey. Everything will go on fine." Northern's expression fully drew out his fury. He grabbed the sailor by the collar. "Do you think you are talking to a kid?" Only after saying it did he realize what he was saying. It didn't seem like an issue when he was in the Dark Continent because all that mattered was survival. But now, faced with this old man, trying to find a way to save the ship before disaster befalls them and being treated like a kid scared of traveling by air was suddenly so disgusting and demeaning. Alistran approached both of them as other sailors began to throw glances in their direction. "What's going on here?" The old joker had his usual humorous face completely replaced by an intense look of rage, and Northern was its recipient. Northern released the man's collar, lowered his head for a second, and muttered, "I'm sorry." Then he walked away briskly. Alistran apologized more on his behalf before leaving the man, and the sailors continued whatever it was they were doing. Alistran glanced at Northern where he was standing, beside the rail. Then he went inside the airship. After a few seconds of going inside, Shin came outside and leaned right beside Northern. "I assumed that this shouldn't be a stressful journey for you. It wasn't your first. But then again, I remember the trauma you've had with your first, so I figured that I was forgetting something." Northern's gaze was lost in the distant clouds. He responded without retrieving them. "Every airship I had entered had left in disaster, one thing to another. The Academy, the damned promised airship from Raven, and the chaos spawn that was after their life. Now, this one with hijackers who were going to crash the whole thing. What's with me and airships?" Shin, observing Northern's prolonged silence after his short sentence, avowed with a soft tone, "Nothing will happen to this ship, Northern. And there will be no disaster because I will protect you, whatever it costs." At that moment, Northern finally retrieved his eyes from the sky and looked at his father, letting out a small smile in a show of gratitude. "I'm sorry for worrying you. Worry me all you want. It is what I want." A second later, Northern frowned, looking forward. "Then I will tell you." Shin looked at him, slightly puzzled but his eyes burning with a readiness to jump into flames at his words. "This ship will be attacked soon." Shin's brows expanded. "And how do I know?" "Well, let's say I have a visionary ability. As you would have guessed, my eyes are not normal," Northern explained briefly, pointing at his blue eyes. Shin's expanded brows coalesced into a deep frown less than a second later, and he asked, "What should we do?" The question made Northern's eyes widen. He definitely wasn't expecting such a response. "Shin, he really has changed a lot. Or has he always been like this?" Northern was silent for a moment, bowing his head with a small chuckle before he raised it back up. "Well, we do every single thing to prevent this ship from crashing. I don't know who they are, but their luck just ran out because we are on this ship. Chapter 525. The Hijackers, Part 2. In the distance, obscured from each other by the clouds, an airship hovered, cutting through the cover like a predatory beast stalking its prey. It was darker in appearance, with jagged edges along its hull, unlike the smooth, polished surface of the Sol vessel. The sails were tattered but not from wear. Rather, they seemed intentionally designed to whip the air like wings of some nightmarish creature. It had an angular shape, almost bird-like, though warped and twisted, as though the materials had been forcibly bent into a malevolent formation. Its hull bore scars of past battles, dents and gashes where the metal looked like it had been patched over hastily. Black symbols were etched into the sides, intricate designs resembling ancient runes. Unlike the vessel, they seemed to be dead, broken, and lost to the weariness of the dark vessel. Two figures stood at the ship's prow, cloaked in shadows. Their faces were obscured by hooded garments, but their postures radiated cold precision. One held a long rifle slung over his shoulder, its barrel gleaming under the dim light breaking through the clouds, while the other rested a hand on a short blade strapped to their hip. The wind around them seemed to ripple unnaturally, and as the ship drew closer, it was clear this was a vessel of damnation. One of the figures, his golden eyes radiating with a deadly grace, warned, "Be sure you do not miss. This will be the core of our operation. If it fails now, old man, cut me some slack already. You've said this like 1,000 times." The other replied with a harsh tone, his voice ruffle-like. He fell to his knee and slammed the rifle off his shoulders, aiming towards the cloud. The figure with the golden eyes narrowed them, his gaze growing colder. "Do not forget your place, boy. If it fails, you'll wish I had only repeated myself." His voice held a quiet malice, barely a whisper carried by the wind. The shadows around him seemed to deepen, coiling like serpents ready to strike. The rifleman grunted, adjusting his aim as he knelt on the splintered deck. His sharp, calculating eyes narrowed behind the scope, tracking something invisible within the thick clouds. "I never miss." The air was thick with tension, the sound of the wind whistling through the tattered sails and the hum of their ship's corrupted essence filling the void between them. Slowly, the rifleman's finger hovered over the trigger, ready to unleash devastation. The airship carrying Northern and his group, along with several other passengers, sailed unsuspectingly, gliding through the clouds with ease. Its passengers, except the white-haired kid and his father, had no idea of the looming threat that now targeted them from the embrace of the clouds. "Do it!" the golden-eyed man commanded. The rifleman pulled the trigger. A sharp crack split the air, followed by a pulse of dark energy rippling outward from the barrel. The shot was not a simple bullet. It was a concentrated burst of refined soul essence, an explosive force specifically designed to disrupt the flow of energy coursing through the opposing ship. The projectile vanished into the clouds, unseen by the passengers below. Aboard Northern's ship, the comm journey was shattered. The airship suddenly lurched to the side, the hum of the engines faltering, their flow of soul essence flickering erratically. Northern grabbed the rail instinctively, his eyes widening as the ship shuddered, veering off course. "What the hell?" he muttered under his breath. Even though he had seen this chaos happening, what troubled him was the anticipation of how it was going to start. Northern thought he had cast his spatial awareness all around but was shocked to find that he didn't even see the hit coming until it had landed. Annoyingly, even now, he still wasn't seeing the source of the hit. The Sol vessel groaned as it tried to correct itself, but the energy within the ship sputtered and wavered. The essence from the attack was disrupting its core. Above, in the other airship, the rifleman stood, a smug grin twisting his lips. Direct hit. The golden-eyed man did not smile. He simply watched, cold and calculating. "We begin the boarding now. Prepare the crew." As the dark vessel descended rapidly toward the Sol vessel, ropes and grappling hooks were thrown overboard, sinking deep into the wooden hull with a sickening crack. The hijackers had made their move. Back on Northern's ship, chaos erupted as the crew scrambled to understand what was happening. Alistron burst out from the cabin, his face filled with a rare fury. He met Northern's eyes across the deck. He glared up, his eyes meeting the red emblem of the hijackers that slithered down the ropes. Too frozen to act, the hijackers landed, darting in all directions. One moved towards Alistron, whose eyes were still widened. Belatedly, as a fist swiftly curved across his face, Alistron's eyes narrowed. He backstepped the attack with ease, the attacker's fist sweeping the air in front of his face. Before the man could swing back his hand, Alistron, with a furious frown on his face, caught the man's hand by the elbow and pulled him in, smashing a devastating punch into his face. The attacker swung in the air, his feet flailing towards the sky as his head plummeted to the ground. Before he finished his fall, Alistron's foot was already accompanying his head, plunging it into the wooden deck with such force that a tremoring creak ran across the whole ship. He glanced up, finding Northern and Shin with his eyes. Northern was locked with two hijackers, but his eyes radiated a coldness that made Alistron worry for the attackers instead. Shin was barely using his entire body while he dealt with his portion. There was a fluidity in his movements that screamed experience. Even though he was limiting his movement as much as he could, he was still moving with practiced efficiency, one that could only be noticed by a master in combat like Alistron. Northern's expression darkened as he scanned the sky, his cold gaze cutting through the chaos. How did I not notice the ship until now? That could only mean two things. The entire airship was a vessel created to mask its presence, or someone on it was masking its presence. He was distracted even as he fought, but his mind raced, calculating the next steps. The attackers weren't the real threat, he could feel it. Two hijackers lunged at him again, their weapons drawn. One swung a jagged blade toward his side, while the other tried to take advantage of the distraction, thrusting a spear towards his back. But Northern moved faster than their eyes could track, slipping between their attacks with a ghostly grace. His hand shot out, grabbing the spear mid-thrust and snapping it in half with a flick of his wrist. The hijacker recoiled in shock, but before he could retreat, Northern's fist connected with his jaw, sending him crashing into the side of the ship. The other hijacker barely had time to react before Northern stepped into his space, twisting the man's wrist and forcing him to drop the blade. A single blow to his chest knocked him to the ground, leaving him gasping for air. Northern didn't waste time. He glanced back up at the sky, the tension in his shoulders tightening. Something was off. The hijackers were just the first wave, fodder meant to create confusion. The real danger was still up there, hidden behind the clouds. That shot had been aimed with surgical precision. Northern found himself more keen on what had managed to hit them from behind. Moreover, whatever had taken a shot at them could not have had the speed to arrive just above them. While Northern was inclined to believe they were the same, his mind screamed at another line of reasoning. Alistron, having dispatched his attacker, strode toward Northern, his fists still clenched in fury. I need you to speak with your sleeping buddy. For these people, we will need all the help we can get. His voice was sharp, cutting through the din of battle around them. Northern's frown deepened, but he didn't answer immediately. Instead, his gaze lingered on the dark ship above, now descending closer. He then swung to Alistron. Sounds like you know them. Who are they and what do they want? Alistron frowned. This is not the time and place for this, but they are a very dangerous bunch. I don't know why they are suddenly attacking an airship heading to Arcadia. Alistron's eyes suddenly widened as if he had an epiphany. Arcadia. These bastards, are they trying to restrict the entry to Arcadia, or are they trying to enter themselves? Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed across the sky. Another shot from the hijacker's ship, this time aimed directly at the heart of the Soul vessel. Chapter 526. The Hijackers, Part 3. The entire Soul vessel trembled tremendously as the second hit struck it from behind, splinters of wood scattering into the nearby clouds. Got it! Northern's face darkly contorted as he swung towards the distant clouds. Chaos eyes revealed themselves for a moment, his pupils seeming to suddenly shrink as they split, making 4 pupils roam across his sclera. Northern's vision entered another scope, a field of vision merging before him that even he, for an instant, found hard to process. As the vision unfolded, a flood of information poured into his head. If there was one thing he knew from the few seconds he used the trueness of the Chaos Eyes, it was that nothing remained hidden before his gaze. The main purpose of Chaos was to unveil that which could not be seen with the naked eye, and that encompassed a broad canopy of things Northern was yet to fully realize or explore. The effects of the Chaos Eyes had, of course, severely affected his normal vision, especially after becoming a master and having his eyes merge with the SpectraVision talent. His pupils had gained a stunning beauty, and his ordinary vision had definitely improved compared to before. Everyone was shaken by the recent attack. The sailors and passengers, who also happened to be drifters, were all thrown into a staggering footwalk. Even Alistran needed a moment to steady himself. But Northern was already on the move, his legs scurrying across the wooden surface of the ship, seemingly unaffected by the loss of balance. He glanced up and, with stunning speed, slipped past the two hijackers who had just landed. As he did, their necks snapped, their heads twisted the other way around. With his face grim, Northern grabbed the rope of the anchor and yanked it free with his strength. The part of the ship the metallic anchor had dug into shattered as Northern pulled it loose. He swung the anchor in the air, one Chaos Eyeball moving to the corner of his eye while the other drifted to the opposite corner. He spun and released a little force on the anchor, swinging it even further. The anchor curved across one of the attackers' necks, severing it with a gory spray of blood. The large anchor, still rolling in the air, didn't pause before crashing into another's waist, brutally destroying his lower spine in a bloody outpour. Northern didn't watch the result of his attack. He was more than certain he had dealt with the two hijackers darting toward him. He grabbed another point of the rope with his hand, pulling both ends apart. The twisting coils began to uncurl, expelling dust as each tightly linked line tore away from the other. He ripped off the anchor from the larger portion of the rope and tossed it aside without turning in that direction. Just as one of the hijackers was about to stab a defenseless woman, the anchor buried one of its 3 hooks into his head, the other 2 viciously scraping across his face. Blood sprayed from the top of his head like a geyser as the hijacker collapsed before the woman. Northern twisted the rope in his arm as several more hijackers were already sliding down toward the deck. He sprinted toward the ship's rail, dragging the long rope behind him. When he reached the rail, he stepped onto it and leaped into the clouds. The rope followed, the hijackers clinging tightly to it. Hidden within the clouds, Northern narrowed his eyes. Simultaneously, a spark crackled beneath his boots, struggling for a beat. Then suddenly, it ignited with a cataclysmic outburst, instantly dissipating the clouds and even the air around him, propelling him straight into the sky. The rope curved upward as Northern flew toward the ship, red flames burning beneath his feet like soaring comets. He plunged back onto the ship before anyone could comprehend what had just passed. As he landed on the deck, he darted toward the ship's mast and swiftly slung the rope around it, tying it securely. Straightening up, he looked at the hijackers, who had been preparing to descend but were now frozen in shock. Even though he was present, Northern's attention wasn't fully there. He glanced over the hijackers, then toward the direction from which he had belatedly sensed the hit. "It's hiding perfectly in the clouds," he surmised before refocusing on the group of hijackers. Their eyes were filled with hesitation, their legs itching to move. However, they couldn't quite pinpoint why the air around them had suddenly grown dark and cold. It felt as if a massive weight was pressing down on them, like being submerged in the depths of the ocean. They felt their fear claw at their throats, and in that instant, they all knew, moving closer to the figure before them meant death. That realization birthed a bitter despair in their hearts. Northern, unbothered by their fear, took 5 steps toward the ship's wheel. There stood the sailor, gripping the wheel with all his might, or so it seemed. "Hey!" Northern's hoarse voice reached him, and the sailor slowly turned, like a creaking door. His face was drenched as though caught in heavy rain, drops of sweat beating on every part of his skin. His eyes bloodshot and brimming with terror. "Oh crap! He was close to me," Northern realized. It seemed the man had been exposed to an enormous portion of his void aura. He looked pale, almost lifeless. I guess its effect on humans really is devastating. Even though Revant had also struggled when close to him, he hadn't appeared as affected as this man. Northern sighed and politely asked, "Please, can you step away from the wheel for a while?" The man wanted to, he really did, but his legs felt too heavy, shaking uncontrollably. Northern suddenly heard a dripping sound and traced it down to the sailor's legs. His eyes widened. Is he peeing his pants? Chapter 527. Who are you? Northern didn't know which he was more embarrassed by. The fact that he had made a poor sailor pee his pants, or the fact the man was peeing his pants helplessly like that. His lips curled in a barely perceptible smile as he watched the sailor, frozen with fear and incapable of any further movement. Without wasting another second, he stepped forward and firmly placed a hand on the man's shoulder, gently pushing him aside. The sailor stumbled away, collapsing to the floor with a dull thud, eyes wide and chest heaving, but Northern paid him no mind. His fingers wrapped around the ship's wheel, and as soon as his hands touched the worn, wooden surface, a strange calmness swept over him. The wind howled around them, clouds thickening, but Northern's focus narrowed. He tugged at the wheel, feeling the ship respond beneath him with a slow groan of resistance. "Now, let's see how you handle this," he muttered, his voice low, almost to himself. The ship trembled as the enormous sails caught the wind, but instead of moving forward, Northern's hands worked skillfully to steer it backward, an action that would have bewildered most of the crew, had they not been so consumed by fear. The vessel wasn't designed to reverse, not in the midst of the skies, but Northern's intuition took hold, guiding him in a maneuver that bent all the natural laws of wind and balance. He cast his gaze toward the cloud cover ahead, his chaos eyes flickering for just a moment. A faint silhouette, imperceptible to normal eyes, floated within the mist, the other ship, where the rifleman had made his move. Northern's grin widened, colder now, calculating. The rifleman probably thought he was safe, hidden in the clouds. He had no idea what was coming for him. With a sharp twist of his wrist, Northern jerked the wheel sharply. The ship lurched, tilting dangerously as the stern angled downward. Yet he maintained perfect control as if he had sailed a ship before. The thing he did, the memories felt inherent in him, begging to be let out. The vessel groaned under the sudden strain, wood creaking ominously, but it heeded his command. The wind caught the sails in just the right direction, and the hijacker's ship swung in a wide arc, moving backward with a speed unnatural for its size. The hijackers, still perched on ropes, scrambling to descend, now lost their bearings completely. The hijackers that were descending down the rope screamed and scrambled for survival but were helplessly being swayed by the strong wind, parted by the roguish movement of the ship. Their cries were buried in the clouds as they lost grip and plunged into the white abyss below them. Northern spared no thought for the carnage. His eyes remained fixed ahead, zeroed in on the unseen rifleman. The clouds parted briefly as the sole vessel cut through them, gaining momentum, the creaking of the wood now turning into a growling roar as the ship powered toward its mark. Almost there. Northern's voice remained a whisper, lost to the gusts of wind. Then, in an instant, the other ship appeared, hovering lightly above the clouds, the outline of the rifleman and the man in a shadow-like cloak, barely discernible on the deck, still hidden behind a mounted scope. He didn't see it coming. With an ear-splitting crash, Northern's vessel slammed into the enemy ship's side, the impact shattering its hull with a deafening roar. The rifleman was thrown off his feet, tumbling across the deck as his weapon slipped from his hands, skittering across the broken planks. While the cloaked man frowned darkly, he staggered a few steps but managed to quickly regain his footing, seemingly miraculously. The collision sent splinters flying in every direction, and the air vessel shuddered under the force. Yet Northern stood firm, his feet planted solidly on the deck, one hand on the wheel as he steered through the chaos. The enemy ship, no longer stable, listed to one side, slowly sinking into the cloud bank beneath it, its shattered hull leaking a trail of debris. Northern released the wheel and turned his attention forward. His chaos eyes glowed faintly blue as he pinpointed the rifleman, now attempting to crawl toward his weapon. Without hesitation, Northern stepped forward, his boots heavy against the deck, each step deliberate. From the hijacker's ship, he leaped into the air and landed powerfully on the dark vessel. The rifleman's breath quickened as he glanced up and met Northern's figure descending on him. He managed to retrieve his rifle and point it up, but just as he did, Northern's gaze was in front of him, his hand gently holding the tip of the rifle. "You made a mistake," Northern said quietly, his voice cold, a chill spreading in the air around him. The rifleman's lips quivered, a sudden fear overtaking his expression. He grimaced and pulled himself away from Northern, quickly jumping back as he thought, "What the hell was that cold fear?" But Northern was already closing in, his hand raised, fingers extending as a faint shimmer of dark flames emanated from them. Before the rifleman could react, the black flame spread out like a blanket and engulfed him, its weight crashing down like an inescapable tide. The rifleman let out a guttural scream as the cold black flames clung to his skin, seeping into his very being. His body convulsed, his muscles locking up as the overwhelming pressure of the chaos flames crashed down on him, dragging him to the ground. The rifleman struggled, but every movement seemed futile. His mind raced in terror, his instincts screaming at him to fight back. Yet his body refused to obey. The flame didn't burn in the conventional sense. No, this was something worse. It gnawed at the edges of his soul, consuming his will to resist. Northern stood over him, his eyes cold and unblinking, locked on the writhing figure before him. Then he shifted his attention to the man in the cloak, who was silent even as his comrades screamed in terror. "You have sinned, and your sin is attacking a ship that I am on." Northern's voice cut through the air, sharp and emotionless. He wasn't angry, he didn't need to be. His presence alone was enough to instill a suffocating fear, a silent authority that demanded submission. The man stared blankly for a while before asking, "Who are you?" Chapter 528. He is Him, Part 1. Northern was in no great mood to answer the question. Moreover, as the man asked, several more hijackers poured out of the ship's cabin. At a glance, Northern could tell they were of a different caliber from the ones he had just dealt with on the ship. Those ones were supposed to be distractions? Perhaps they had wanted to significantly reduce the number of drifters on the ship, or tire them out, because they wouldn't have sent these lots to attack with those easy-to-kill bastards. Northern let out a bitter smile. He felt his mouth sour with pity as he watched a confident grin rise up the man's lips because more people surrounded him. He glanced down. The rifleman had stopped moving, just intermittently shivering like he was having hiccups. Northern didn't feel bad for him, or for any of them, but he thought of what he was going to do to them right now. His mouth contorted bitterly. However, a man has to do what a man has to do, doesn't he? It doesn't matter if you can't speak. You just walked into your own grave. Get him. Northern's lips curled into a faint smirk as he watched the hijackers shoot towards him at the command of the cloaked man. He opened his hand, a swirl of black sparks appearing and, in a matter of heartbeats, coalescing into a black sheen metal. This is a great opportunity to test out that Blood Reaver thing. Northern shifted his stance, feeling the familiar surge of energy coursing through his veins. Now that he had become a master, he could feel and control wakingly the activity and flow of his void essence. Such things as reinforcing his body with his essence were now possible. But Northern had another idea in mind. He had seen the result when he reinforced the sword with black flames, but he was very curious how it would look if he reinforced it with his essence alone. Not to mention, this was a good time to put to test the limits of Chaos footwork, since he had not used it in a while. Northern could hear the sound of his breath, however, not that a perfect decorum existed. As the new round of hijackers ran towards him shouting, he settled into the first stance. His mind found a room of perfect focus even in the roaring atmosphere. It did not matter. Silence settled into his heart as his eyes locked focus on the coming crowd. It made their noise begin to drown into the background of his beating heart. Then, before his eyes and vast area of spatial awareness, everything seemed to be panning out before him. While the hijackers took their next footstep, he was already seeing two more ahead of them. It, in fact, seemed like he was living in the future while they were 2 steps behind in the present. From his vantage point, they were that 2 steps ahead. And as he moved to counter that 2 steps ahead. Blending with the chaos footwork and his eyes, a perfect synergy of flow waited to be unveiled as the hijackers approached him. Why are they taking forever? Their steps were just too slow, perhaps because he was from a futuristic viewpoint. Finally, the first hijacker reached him. He lunged forward, his blade slicing through the air toward Northern's neck. In a heartbeat, Northern's form blurred. He sidestepped gracefully, his movements almost lazy, yet impossibly swift. The attack passed harmlessly by, and before the assailant could recover, Northern delivered a sharp elbow to his ribs. The man crumpled with a wheeze, dropping his sword. Too aggressive, Northern noted, his voice barely above a whisper. 2 more attackers charged in tandem, one swinging a heavy mace while the other thrust a spear. Northern's chaos eyes flickered, as he perceived their intentions before they themselves fully committed to the attack. He flowed between them, his feet tracing an intricate pattern on the deck. The mace struck the spot he'd occupied moments before, splintering the wood, while the spear grazed the edge of his coat. Better, he mused. As he moved the dark mortal blade, even with the slightest movement, he felt its cold weight balance perfectly in his hand. The blade's dark surface seemed to absorb the light. As the mace wielder stumbled from his missed swing, Northern brought the flat of the blade against the back of the man's head, rendering him unconscious. Northern swung a clean arc across the spear wielder, but he had jumped back, making Northern tilt his head. Did I just miss, or is it that you have good instincts? The spear wielder felt his entire body tremble from fear. His action was just one prompted by the flight response of fear. If I hadn't moved. Before he could complete his thought process, Northern's blade plunged out of his back with a squelching sound that expunged blood in a burst. The man's eyes widened, blood streaming down from them. Another from behind slashed down his sword on Northern, but Northern's form blurred, leaving an afterimage. Northern's blade flashed. The dark mortal blade sliced cleanly through flesh and bone, severing the man's arm at the elbow. Blood sprayed in a wide arc, the crimson mist painting the deck in gruesome streaks. The man shrieked in agony, clutching at the stump of his arm as he collapsed to the ground, writhing in pain. Another hijacker, horrified but determined, rushed in from Northern's side. This one was smarter, using the distraction of his fallen comrade to attempt a quick stab at Northern's back. But Northern had already seen it, 2 steps ahead, his eyes showing him the chaos in the future. With a smooth pivot, Northern twisted his body, raising his blade to intercept the attack. The hijacker's sword clashed with the dark mortal blade, but the moment their weapons met, a pulse of void essence erupted from Northern's sword, disintegrating the hijacker's blade in an instant. The man barely had time to register his shock before Northern drove the point of the blade deep into his chest. The sickening squelch of flesh tearing apart filled the air as the blade penetrated his torso, skewering him from chest to spine. The hijacker's eyes went wide with terror, blood bubbling at his lips as he gasped for breath. Northern twisted the blade, eliciting a grotesque cracking sound as the man's ribcage shattered under the pressure. With a single pull, Northern ripped the blade free, and the hijacker slumped lifelessly to the ground, blood pooling beneath him. He could feel himself rejuvenating with energy as he harvested blood from his opponents. Good, good, he muttered. This is very good. Chapter 529. He is Him, Part 2. Northern felt so good in a way that he never had before. Was it the fact that he could somehow now tell where his mistakes lay as he moved, or because he directed the flow of the chaos footwork with more definition than before? Previously, chaos footwork had seemed to make him move like someone diving in for a fall but happening to take advantage of it. It was in taking advantage of the relapsing moments of both him and his opponent. But now that he could see the chaos ahead of him, he could vividly see those relapsing moments. Hence, he didn't need to take advantage of his fall. He needed to meld himself and his flow into a line that caused and controlled those relapsing moments. Hence, the difference being that before, Northern was susceptible. He had to move like he would fall, and in such a fall came the execution of the chaos footwork. Every one of his movements was altered to bring out chaos, no matter how little or through whom, whether it was him or his opponent. Chaos needed to reign. But right now, Northern could feel things a bit differently, like he was the chaos that needed to reign on this battlefield. His eyes were seeing all the chaos, which meant the chaos that needed to reign before his perception was already reigning. Now all his footwork did was flow into them. Like it or not, the fusion of chaos eyes and spectra vision was a great boon to his visual prowess. He did not think or expect that he'd be making such leaping progress in a matter of minutes after putting to prolonged practical use the foresight of chaos and its footwork. And all this progress just made him feel even better about himself. As they watched him, the others hesitated, fear now fully consuming them. They had never seen anything like this. Northern wasn't just fighting them. He was tearing through them like a force of nature, his movements precise and deadly, his blade an extension of death itself. The leader's face, once calm and confident, now twisted into something more frantic, his cloak billowing in the wind as he barked orders. Surround him. Don't let him escape. 4 of the remaining hijackers rushed in at once, forming a semicircle around Northern. They moved in unison, their weapons raised and ready, clearly more experienced than the cannon fodders Northern had just dispatched. Escape? Northern's voice rang out like the cold shrill of imminent death. They froze mid-action and trembled. I can feel fear oozing from your pores, he said to all 4 of them. You are not even sure of what to do. His voice seemed to rise atop a tall wall that blocked all lights. You are no match for me. The first grimaced and reclenched his fist, swinging his sword toward Northern's shoulder. But before the blade could make contact, Northern stepped forward with blinding speed, bringing the dark mortal blade down in a brutal arc. The blade cleaved clean through the man's neck, sending his head spinning into the air. A fountain of blood erupted from the stump of his neck, drenching the others in a gory spray as his body crumpled to the deck. The second attacker came at him from the side, a warhammer raised high. Northern sidestepped the blow easily, his footwork allowing him to glide past the attack with almost supernatural grace. He lashed out with his blade, severing the man's leg at the knee in a single clean strike. The hijacker collapsed, screaming, his severed limb twitching as blood gushed from the stump. The remaining 2 attackers were already faltering, their movements sluggish as the fear began to take hold. What? Do you wish to escape? He teased. In a sudden, soft and smooth flash, Northern closed in, eradicating their chances of escape. He manifested his essence and poured it into the dark, gleaming blade of the death-imbued weapon as he lunged toward them. The blade gained an even deeper darkness, its glossiness disappearing completely. A thick pitch of bluish darkness clothed the blade, its sharp edge thinning sharper. He drove the dark mortal blade into the abdomen of the third hijacker. The sword entered like he was cutting butter with a butcher's knife, the force of the strike lifting the man off his feet as the blade tore through his torso. Northern yanked the blade free, and the man's organs spilled onto the deck with a wet splatter, his body convulsing violently before going still. The final hijacker dropped his weapon, his face pale with terror as he stumbled backward. Please, no, he whimpered, his voice shaking. Northern's eyes, now glowing faintly with an azure intensity, met the man's gaze. For a brief moment he considered letting him go, but that moment passed quickly. He stepped forward, the dark mortal blade raised high, and with a swift, brutal swing, he decapitated the man in one clean motion. The headless body staggered for a moment before collapsing in a heap, blood pouring from the neck in thick, steaming rivers. Silence fell over the deck, the only sound the soft drip of blood pooling around Northern's feet. He stood there, breathing heavily, his eyes scanning the bodies strewn across the deck. The air was thick with the stench of blood and death, and for a moment, Northern allowed himself to feel the weight of what he had done. But he felt nothing. Instead, he muttered again, "Too slow," almost disappointed. Then his eyes slowly widened as a realization dawned on him. Even after killing a man that surrendered, I feel nothing. No! He belatedly realized something again as he took a step back and looked at all the bloodshed he had caused on the deck for a second time. Body parts littered the whole deck in a pool of crimson. It was a carnage that only he had single-handedly wrought. And yet, there was not a single remorse in his heart. He didn't feel anything. A small frown creased his forehead. The effective void has gone deeper than I thought it has. Northern averted his gaze and looked forward to the only man standing on the ship now. The cloaked man stared at Northern in disbelief. His hands trembled, his confident facade utterly shattered. He took a step back, his mind racing as he tried to comprehend how things had gone so horribly wrong. Northern tilted, his eyes gleaming with deathly light. "Oh? Would you like to escape?" Chapter 530. The Limit of Form. The cloaked man stood frozen, pearls of sweat rolling down his face. The wind had somehow managed to take down the hood of his cloak, gently brushing against his matte blonde hair. The windswept hair conjured a hopeless visage with his thin maroon eyeballs. His mouth was slightly open, despair slowly contorting his face. Northern, however, just stared with cold indifference, the point of his sword slightly touching the wooden ground of the ship's deck. Silence wafted tensely between the two of them as the man was not sure what to do. His mind screamed in utter disarray. No, 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 this was not how this was supposed to go. We had planned this for days. This was only supposed to be a preliminary stage of what is to come. How could things go so wrong? I'm dead. I'm dead. I'm dead, he's going to kill me. An even stronger despair began to rise in his head. One that seemed to totally consume the one Northern had inflicted upon him. His eyes slowly contorted and began to find their flames again. The flames this time were matter, burning with rage. "What have you done?" the man screamed, grabbing his cloak and swiping it off his body with a single flip of his hand. In his right hand, a silvery shower of sparks was already swirling. Northern observed the man and his hand before taking one hand, using his pinky finger to clean off the dirt on his face with an irritated expression. Then he straightened his hand as a sleek, midnight black greatsword with a shimmering silver edge manifested into it. The hilt of the sword was dark, with subtle engravings that seemed to shift, almost as though they were alive, reacting to the mental state of its holder. Before Northern's eyes, there was almost a stark resemblance that it bore to the living wood of the soul vessel. Like a living metal, Northern narrowed his eyes and lazily extended the dark mortal forward. "Like I said when I first arrived, you have only one sin, which is attacking a ship that I am on. Now, I don't care who you work for or what you and your folks were staging, but curse your fates that you happened to cross paths with me." He paused a second, his eyes radiating a cold wickedness as he evaluated the man. Sometimes, coincidences can be quite brutal on plans. He shook his head in pity towards the man and swung his sword to one side before getting into stance, getting ready to give the man his own fair share of death. The man gritted his teeth, his face folded by a searing hot rage. He swung his sword to the side horizontally and dashed at Northern. Northern's eyes widened the moment the man moved. Contrary to what one would have thought, "Oh, he's fast." If it wasn't Northern, any other person would probably have not seen him coming and lost their reaction time. But Northern was not like any other person. Although he didn't see the cloaked man's dash unfold before the actual movement. Chaos, after all, did not mean every movement. It was just in the thick of it. Northern, however, could observe with his keen eyes every shift of the man's muscles, the slight twitch in his feet as he pivoted, the faint tightening of his grip around the greatsword. It all played out in slow motion through Northern's chaos eyes. And from such keen and intense observation, Northern, thanks to his past battles, had been able to build a reaction time that could be considered insane. He was used to fast opponents, which was why fighting the hijackers just seemed so slow. But this man was different. The speed, the precision, it excited Northern in a way he hadn't felt in a long time. It amused Northern for a moment. And the next moment, the great sword came crashing down toward him, a blur of shimmering silver in the stormy air. It wasn't just fast. It carried with it an immense force, enough to cleave the deck in two if Northern didn't react. And react he did. In a smooth, almost lazy movement, Northern sidestepped, the blade missing him by mere inches. The gust of wind that followed it was sharp, and the deck beneath their feet trembled from the power. Impressive, Northern murmured, his tone one of genuine intrigue. Dark Mortal remained at his side, unhurried. The cloaked man growled in frustration and swung again, this time a horizontal arc aimed at Northern's midsection. Northern didn't retreat. Instead, he stepped forward, weaving around the blade with the precision of a dancer, letting it pass harmlessly behind him. As he moved, he raised his hand and drove the pommel of the Dark Mortal blade into the man's side with a sharp, cracking force. The man let out a grunt of pain but didn't falter. He twisted, ignoring the blow, and brought his great sword up in a sweeping upward strike. Northern leaned back, following with intrigued eyes as the tip of the living metal passed in front of his face. It was almost playful, the way Northern danced around each attack with minimal effort, his movements relaxed, fluid. But Northern's mind was far from idle. As the clash continued, he was learning. The cloaked man's movements were not just raw power. They were calculated. Each attack carried weight, but it wasn't mindless. There was a rhythm to his strikes, a pattern that Northern was slowly unraveling. The man was fast, yes, but predictable. His attacks followed through in traditional arcs. It was powerful swordsmanship, but Northern realized that power could be the man's weakness. A smirk tugged at Northern's lips as he realized something from the man's attack pattern. It has a form. This man, despite his rage and desperation, was bound by the structure of his form. Northern, however, could be anything, he could be nothing. If the man's attack pattern wasn't based on a form, Northern felt the man would have been more of an opponent to him. But was it possible to create an attack pattern without form? A combat style that is ever-bending, ever-changing, ever-flexible, ever-evolving? Although Northern never allowed himself to be tied down by the rigidity of traditional techniques, his movements, guided by instinct and chaos footwork, were ever-changing. But it wasn't enough. Somehow, his mind for some reason drifted towards the formless attribute. He remembered his encounter with how he had used Formless to copy the attack pattern of the Devil Corpse Eater. But he wasn't interested in copying his opponent's attack patterns. His opponent's combat style was weak and useless against him for a reason. He wanted something more. What more could Formless do that he was not thinking about? Chapter 531. Disgusting Disappointment. The cloaked man roared in frustration and swung once more, this time faster, his blade leaving a blur of silver in its wake as it came down. Northern met the attack with his Dark Mortal blade, their swords clashing in a violent burst of sparks. The force of the impact sent shockwaves rippling through the air, and for a brief moment, the two warriors were locked in place, their blades grinding against one another. The man gritted his teeth, his maroon eyes burning with rage. "Stop dodging, damn you!" he spat, pushing against Northern's blade with all his might. Northern's eyes, however, were calm. He tilted his head slightly, studying the man's face, his posture, his tension. It was clear that the man was relying on sheer brute force now, trying to overpower him. But power alone would never be enough. Northern then raised a brow in confusion, pausing to ask the man, "I don't understand. Why are you not using your talent?" He looked at all of them. Why did you all not use your talents? It was almost like they all relied on sheer power. And he was very sure they were drifters too. So why were they not using their powers? Northern was very confused. The man frowned very darkly and rushed forward again, meeting Northern in a lock of blades. Northern met his furious gaze with a cold and calculating one, raising his head slightly as he observed the man's expression. Then he concluded, "It seems you won't use your talent ability no matter what. It's so sad that this will come to a quick end." With a sudden shift of weight, Northern released the pressure, letting the man's own force carry him forward. The cloaked man stumbled, his balance momentarily thrown off, and in that split second Northern struck. He didn't aim for a killing blow, not yet. Instead, he allowed the flat of his blade to slam into the man's ribs, sending him skidding across the blood-soaked deck. The man gasped, coughing as he scrambled to his feet, pain flashing across his features. Yet he stood again, his grip tightening around his sword. "Bastard!" he hissed through clenched teeth. Northern's voice remained cold and indifferent. "You're too predictable." That single sentence ignited something fierce in the man. He lunged again, his movements wild now, less refined. Northern sighed inwardly. This was always the problem. Rage made opponents sloppy, clouded their judgment, made them easy to read. This is so disappointing. How can fighting monsters be more interesting than fighting humans? The cloaked man's greatsword came crashing down, but Northern stepped forward this time, slipping into the man's guard with fluid precision. He sidestepped and thrust his fist into the man's jaw, sending him staggering back, dazed. Northern followed up immediately, his footwork a blur of speed, and swung Dark Mortal in a wide arc. The cloaked man barely managed to raise his sword to block, but the force of the blow sent him reeling. Northern pressed forward, his strikes relentless yet flowing without pattern. One moment, his sword was aimed at the man's chest. The next, it was sweeping toward his legs, forcing the man to stay on the defensive, his movements increasingly desperate. With each clash, Northern felt it, the combat style he was beginning to craft. It had no fixed form, no set rhythm. It was like the wind, like the chaos that swirled within him. There was beauty in that unpredictability, in the formlessness. A combat style that would never be bound by techniques passed down through generations like these heritages. No, his style would be something entirely his own. The cloaked man, blood dripping from his mouth, finally managed to create some distance between them, panting heavily. His eyes darted around, searching for an opening, but Northern gave him none. "This is impossible." The man wheezed, his voice shaky. "How can someone like you?" Northern cut him off, his tone almost bored. "Someone like me?" He tilted his head slightly, his cold gaze locking onto the man's. "I already told you, didn't I? You were unlucky enough to cross paths with me. Besides, I don't understand why you won't just use your talent and make this easier for yourself. I thought fighting a human would be so rewarding, really." His voice went low in disappointment. "Instead, it's been a disgusting disappointment." The man roared again, the silver blade flashing one last time as he made his final, desperate charge. But Northern was ready. His form seemed to blur as he moved, his footwork weaving between the man's frantic attacks. With a graceful twist, Northern sidestepped the final swing and brought Dark Mortal blade down in a brutal, decisive strike. The blade cut deep into the man's chest, cleaving through muscle and bone. Blood sprayed across the deck, painting the air red as the man let out a choked gasp. His eyes widened in disbelief as he stared at Northern, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came. Northern stepped back, pulling his blade free, and watched as the man collapsed to the ground, blood pooling beneath him. The wind howled around them, the ship creaking ominously beneath the weight of the battle's aftermath. For a moment, Northern stood there, staring down at the broken body of his opponent, his mind quiet. Northern then swept his eyes across the entire deck, and as he did, his eyes slowly expanded. Because all the bodies he had just dealt with were totally gone, leaving only the cloaked man's. What happened? His mind wondered. Then his eyes narrowed as chaos eyes revealed themselves. Something was birthed before his vision. It made him pale with irritation. The ligatures that were supposed to weave the man's body, even the blood, all of it was non-existent. He looked down at the man's body, the pupils in his expanded eyes trembling. Have I been fighting an illusion all the while? No, it wasn't an illusion. Couldn't have been. It was too perfect to be an illusion. Then were they clones? Northern grimaced. All this blood is too real, more like an illusion, but at the same time it's not an illusion. If it's cloning, then it's a very interesting kind of cloning. His eyes contorted with intense lust. I want it! Finally, he watched as the cloaked man's body dissolved into ashes and flowed into the air, his eyes slowly watching as the ashes went. Then he called out, Black Mamba! As if he had been waiting all along, Black Mamba appeared instantaneously, kneeling before Northern. Follow it. Do not engage and do not be detected, Northern commanded. Black Mamba immediately scurried away like a snake. Chapter 532. The Strongest Drifter. Back on the Soul Vessel, immediately after Northern had maneuvered his way into the other airship and drifted unnaturally away, the number of drifters attacking them had reduced drastically. The already present ones were easily dealt with, and everything seemed to have calmed down. The sailors and drifters who were not wounded were tending to the wounded ones. 3 drifters who happened to be healers were helping to take care of the sailors' first aid and moving on to the next as quickly as they could. Alistran stared at the disaster with a distraught face. Shin was also beside him, glancing around with no particular emotion. After a while he said, Who are they? Alistran looked away, turning to the back of the ship. The Soul Vessel had taken heavy damage. Black smoke was enormously oozing from its rear, and its flying speed had decreased by half. However, it was still going regardless. Alistran sighed and looked back at Shin. Aren't you worried about your son? He went and took off on his own. What is with kids these days? He commented, holding his head with one hand. Shin smiled softly. My son will be fine. You should see if your attention is needed around. Alistran nodded vibrantly, both of them deciding to make obvious what had just happened, before he walked away. Shin stood towards the rail of the ship, looking back as he worried a little about Northern. Then Ryan joined him, yawning tiredly. I'm glad you are safe. Your help would have gone a long way, Shin said, glancing around at the casualties and then back to Ryan. Ryan was silent for a moment. Then he answered, his expression ever indifferent. If I had helped, I'd have needed to use my talent, and my talent would deal more damage to the ship than had already been done. Besides, that guy was here. I didn't think there'd be a need for me to join. He said all of this with a straight and indifferent expression on his face. That guy. Northern. Shin looked down and lingered for a bit before his voice rolled out again. If you were that confident, then Northern must be strong. Ryan's expression folded sternly as he turned to look at Shin straight in the eyes. I watched him fight a paragon for a bit. I happened to be nearby, waiting for Lady Raven. I had taken shelter somewhere outside. The wall broke, so it was quite easy to see, and with the scope of damage of the fight, there was no one focusing that wouldn't have seen. His voice settled for a bit before coming again. It made me realize one thing. He looked away from Shin. Northern is the strongest drifter that I have ever known, which is why I am here. Shin was for a moment lost in thought about all Ryan had been saying, then blinked, bringing himself back. Why you are here? Ryan looked at him and moved away from the rail, going back inside to probably continue his sleep. Of course, typical Ryan. It was a miracle that he had spoken this much, and this was probably the most Shin had heard him say. At some point, Shin wasn't sure if he knew what Ryan sounded like. A couple of minutes later, Shin saw something pierce the clouds from behind. It was the bow of another ship, evilly dark, in contrast to the Soul Vessel they were on. Shin's eyes narrowed as the dark bow of the approaching ship pierced through the clouds, its jagged form cutting an ominous silhouette against the gray sky. The very sight of it sent a chill down his spine. The vessel was unlike any he had seen before. Its hull appeared to be made of dark metal, almost black, with eerie crimson lights flickering from within its crevices. It looked like something forged in the deepest pits of darkness. He stepped back from the rail, his hand instinctively going to the hilt of his sword. What in the world is that? He muttered beneath his breath. This was a mother vessel to the airship that had dropped the hijackers from earlier and even theirs. Whatever this was, coming their way wasn't friendly, and the Sol vessel was already damaged and slow. Alistran returned to the deck just then, his face still etched with concern. "What is it?" he asked, following Shin's gaze. "Another ship," Shin answered quietly, his voice tense. "And it doesn't look like they're here to help." Alistran squinted, trying to make out the details of the dark vessel through the swirling mist. His heart sank when he noticed the red lights flickering along its hull, like veins pulsing with malice. "Damn it! Them again!" Shin glanced at Alistran for a moment. Now more than ever before, he was sure that the old Joker knew what was going on. He just did not want to say. There were so many mysteries around him, and Shin was curious. He didn't feel the need to indulge it. After all, this would be over for him, his son, and Ryan once they stepped foot on Arcadia. He just needed to manage until they got to Arcadia. Alistran's mind raced. The Sol vessel was already in critical condition from the previous attack. It could barely keep itself in the air, let alone withstand another assault. The sailors were tending to the wounded, and most of the drifters capable of fighting were already exhausted. If the ship brought more enemies, "We need to prepare," Shin said, turning to Alistran, his voice urgent. "Get the drifters ready, those who can still fight. We can't let them take us by surprise." Alistran nodded, snapping out of his daze. "Right. I'll gather the others." As Alistran hurried off to rally the remaining drifters, Shin remained by the rail, watching the dark ship draw closer. His hand tightened on his sword hilt. Where was Northern? He knew Northern was strong and he shouldn't be worried right now. Ryan's words had confirmed it, but the thought of him being alone, possibly facing something even more dangerous than the last group of hijackers, still gnawed at him regardless. The dark ship was closer now, its shadow looming over them like a predator circling its prey. The ship slowed as it neared, coming to a silent stop within a very close distance. Then a platform unfolded from the ship and fell onto theirs. A single figure walked out of the ship, marching on the platform and drawing towards them. When Shin saw the figure, he tilted his head in shock. Northern. Chapter 533. The Object of Fear. Northern stepped down from the ship with a slightly disheveled expression. "What's with the welcome?" Everyone had their weapons raised in some form or another. Despite the exhaustion evident on their faces, and the injuries many bore, they still carried determined gazes, ready to see this through to the very end. As inspiring as it was to look at them, it was also quite pitiful. "How long until this ship gives up and crashes?" Northern asked, ignoring everything else. "We're barely holding it together," one of the sailors standing around answered carelessly. The others glanced at him, causing the clueless fellow to shrug indifferently. "It's broken at the bottom, but I'm sure it's durable enough to get us to Arcadia," the sailor continued. He glanced around and stopped when his eyes landed on Alistran. Then he moved out of the way. Immediately, the other sailors yelled, "What are you waiting for? Go, go, go to the angry-looking ship," one of them shouted. Shin approached Northern. He was silent for a few seconds before finally asking, his voice soft, "Are you okay?" "I'm fine." At that moment, Alistran joined them, trying to hide the shock of the situation behind his weary expression. He sighed. This kid, wandering off on your own and coming back with a ship. I'm surprised a kid like you can handle a monster like that. When did you learn how to sail ships?" Northern raised a brow. That's true. He hadn't even realized until now that he had sailed 2 ships without ever taking a sailor's course. But as the thought settled, so did the answer. When Northern became the Lord of the Tower, an enormous amount of knowledge had poured into him. Sailing was part of that knowledge. If Northern chose to pursue the path of a sailor, he would undoubtedly be the most skilled and prominent sailor in all of the Central Plains. But he had better things to do than that, such as saving a mother, killing a Ruffsburg, and tricking a couple of shameless, underhanded entities. Now, those tasks might sound simple and straightforward, but they were the most unsimple and unstraightforward things Northern had ever faced. He looked back at Alistran, his eyes cold and unblinking. I don't know. Once I placed my hand on the wheel, everything just fell into place. Besides, it wasn't like I needed to start the engine or anything. Everything was already working. Alistran glanced down for a moment, his eyes briefly narrowing before looking back up. I guess that makes sense. Were you able to find anything? Northern met his gaze, his expression devoid of any emotion, but deep within his eyes, there was a keen awareness of what Alistran was trying to do. The man pressed on when Northern didn't immediately reply. What kind of foes did you face? Did they reveal any information or say anything? Did you check the ship? Northern finally blinked and responded in an indifferent tone. Why would they reveal anything to me? I don't care about them or their objectives. I only needed to get to Arcadia without hindrance. That's why I fought. Don't get it twisted. He gave Alistran a dirty look and walked past him. At that point, Alistran clenched his fists tight, squeezing even harder as Northern passed him. Northern, hearing the microsound of the man's tightening fists, scoffed inwardly. He didn't intend to inflame the old fool. He had simply spoken the truth. But if Alistran was offended by it, Northern didn't care. He can come take a swing at me and see how bitterly it ends for him. Northern confidently strode into the cabin. He came out a couple of minutes later with Ryan, and both of them crossed over to the other ship. By that time, the passenger transfer was almost complete. Alistran stood by the rail of the old ship, lost in thought. When the evacuation was done, Shin tapped him on the shoulder to get his attention, and together they crossed to the dark vessel. The crew left the dark airship, watching as the once magnificent Sol vessel rested within the clouds, lonely and abandoned. The crew were shocked as they stepped onto the ship and saw the pool of blood that still stained parts of the deck. Their footsteps echoed unervingly loud against the silent, empty ship as they moved hesitantly. The air felt thick, heavy with the residue of violence that had clearly unfolded here. But despite the visible remnants of battle, the splintered wood, the deep gashes carved into the deck, and the unmistakable pools of blood, there were no bodies to be found. The passengers exchanged uneasy glances, their murmurs growing louder as they moved around, trying to find places to hang around. Where are the bodies? There's so much blood, but no one's here. It's like they just vanished. Confusion and dismay rippled through the group as they spread out, each one trying to make sense of the mess. Some of the sailors knelt down, tentatively touching the dark stains on the deck as if to confirm it was real. One sailor, with a deep frown etched on his face, dipped his fingers into one of the thicker puddles and rubbed them together, his brow furrowing as the thick, sticky texture of blood clung to his skin. "Looks fresh," he muttered to himself, though it was loud enough for those nearby to hear. His words only deepened the collective confusion. A woman covered her mouth, her eyes wide as she took in the scene. How could this much blood be spilled, and there be no sign of the bodies? Where did they go? Another passenger, an older man with silver hair and a limp, shook his head in disbelief, glancing briefly at Northern. "What exactly did he do here?" someone whispered, their tone accusatory. One of the healers, who had been tending to the wounded drifters earlier, crossed her arms and nodded toward the streaks of blood smeared across the walls. This much blood! No ordinary man could have done this. The murmurs grew louder. Did he slaughter them all? Did he just wipe them out? It looks like no one even stood a chance. Monstrous, really? But where are the bodies? The same question kept echoing through the group, as though their minds couldn't move past that one grisly detail. No one dared speak it aloud, but the thought was there, hanging in the air like a specter. What kind of person leaves this much destruction without a trace of the dead? Even the sailors, usually hardened by the rough nature of their work, looked uneasy. Alistran, who had crossed over with Shin, stood silently at the back, observing the reactions of the passengers. His own expression was tight, the faint crease of concern deepening across his forehead. He didn't voice it, but the scene before him disturbed him as much as anyone else. What exactly had Northern done here? Thalen had told him to be wary of the white-haired boy, but in the end, It was only a 16-year-old kid. He didn't think he'd need to be so worried. But this proved him wrong. This carnage was on a scale even he had never anticipated. "They're scared," Shin noted quietly, glancing at the passengers. "They don't say it outright, but you can see it in their eyes. They're starting to wonder about him." Alistran's lips pressed into a thin line. "They're wondering if Northern is a danger to them, too." Shin nodded, his face thoughtful. "It's only natural. They've seen the aftermath of something brutal and have no answers." Alistran's gaze followed Northern's figure in the distance as he moved about the dark ship. The young drifter was impassive, seemingly unaware, or perhaps unconcerned, by the murmurs and the unease spreading among the crew and passengers. Alistran scoffed downward. "Hell, how have you been surviving so far? Even I am not sure what to think about him. I feel as much as they do. I can't help but wonder if he is a danger to me too." Shin shrugged, a small sigh escaping his lips. "I am still getting used to this too." Northern, standing in a dark corner of the ship, leaned against its wall and glanced around at everyone. He didn't really care what they thought. What? Did they expect me to mop the blood and bring the ship to them?
Foolish humans.
He suddenly felt tired of it all. Humans were going to be humans after all. They easily forgot their ship was just about to crash, and this young man came with a solution. Now, the focus of all the crew seemed to be whether or not he killed all of them ruthlessly. They feared him. Their eyes trembled and many averted their gazes from him. It didn't make Northern sad. In fact, he was still indifferent regardless of how they felt. Although at some point he wondered if he should kill them all. But it'd be a hassle. Unlike those hijackers, these ones are drifters and will actually use their talents. It could have been a great avenue to copy talents, but Northern did not have so many fragments. Moreover, he wasn't going to rush into talent copying this time. Instead, he was going to create a style for himself and build a path. Something encompassing, at the same time, carrying only his essence. He was not sure about how to go with it, but he kept thinking about it and other things as the ship flew towards Arcadia. Some way, distracting himself from the thought of killing everyone on the airship. Chapter 534. The City of Arcadia. Northern leaned with his hands on the rails of the ship, staring into the distant clouds with squinted eyes. After a while, the mutterings died down, but the gazes didn't stop. One way or another, they looked at him. Some wore heavy curiosity tugging at their expressions, while others bore crude and naked fear. Some were even so fearful that their legs seemed to sink into an imaginary ground as they walked around him. But he paid no heed to them, instead enjoying the gentle breeze that caressed his cheeks. After half an hour, the clouds began to part, and Northern could see something in the distance. At first, it was faint, but the landscape was marked by white and brown. As the airship drew closer, the sky seemed to transition from a celestial white to a cerulean blue, with smaller clusters of clouds dotting the horizon. From above, the city of Arcadia slowly came into view. Arcadia was a harmonious blend of modern and traditional ingenuity, a delicate masterpiece that effortlessly spread out beneath the cerulean sky. The streets, paved with time-worn stone, wove between timber-framed houses with gabled roofs. Their windows were trimmed with flowering vines and wooden shutters. Above the city, though still below the airship, hot air balloons drifted lazily in the sky, their soft shadows rippling over the terraced city like silent whispers of adventure. Towering spires from ancient cathedrals rose alongside newer buildings of polished stone and glass, an architectural handshake between past and present. Beneath the shade of several trees, pink petals swirled gently in the wind. A quiet bench waited for travelers to pause and take in the beauty. Gardens brimming with carefully tended flowers and lush greenery lined the pathways, offering bursts of color and the scent of fresh blooms. The whole city seemed to breathe, alive with a sense of peaceful progression. A place where time didn't move hastily but flowed gently, as if savoring every moment. The airship slowly descended onto a platform at the edge of the city's grand square, an expansive space bordered by towering trees and fountains that sparkled in the warm light of the late afternoon. The platform itself was a seamless mix of polished wood and gleaming stone. As the airship touched down with a soft thud, Northern could hear the faint hum of mechanisms engaging, the gentle hiss of the ship's release valves decompressing. The crew moved about briskly, preparing for the passengers to disembark, though eyes still lingered on him. Northern straightened from the rail, feeling the weight of the many stares fixed on him. His gaze sharpened as the full visual of Arcadia unfolded before him, now at a much closer and more magnified level. He took a deep breath, inhaling the distinct sense that only a city like Arcadia could offer. The crispness of the high-altitude air mingled with the faint aroma of fresh flowers and the ever-present rhythm of life below. As he made his way to the gangplank, his eyes scanned the cityscape again. A subtle wariness burned in the depth of his eyes, barely noticeable but there nonetheless. Shin and Ryan followed behind, with Alistran arriving a bit late. They all stepped off the airship and onto the platform, taking a spiral staircase downwards. A sailor hurried after Northern as they descended the stairs. young man," he called. However, Northern didn't stop until he was close to Shin and the others. Shin tapped him on the shoulder to get his attention. Northern looked back, his eyes worn and filled with weariness. Even Shin was a bit shocked and questioned internally. "What's wrong?" Northern had faint lines beneath his eyes, stretching down slightly. He looked back with a frustrated groan. "What is it?" he asked, only to pause as he recognized the sailor's familiar face. "What?" he repeated, more directly this time. "Young man, sir. I have come to apologize for the other time." The sailor bowed his head slightly as he spoke. "I treated you like a kid when you were being cautious. If I had paid attention to your questions, perhaps I could have warned the others, and we wouldn't have had to bother you so much. But I am sincerely grateful for your help. Thanks to you, we reached Arcadia safely." Northern stared blankly for a moment before finally blinking and sighing. "It's fine," he said, waving the man away with his hand before turning to continue his descent. Shin smiled and glanced between Northern and the sailor, who was already heading back. After a few moments of walking, they found themselves amidst the people of Arcadia, moving through the square with a sense of purpose. There was an air of relaxation, as if the city itself encouraged its inhabitants to take their time. Northern stopped and turned to Alistran, who tried hard to hide the obstinate expression on his face. "First, we should find a place to settle down. Since there's a friend of a friend who owes me a favor, that part should be easy, so follow me." He immediately turned left, leading them away from the square and into a narrow street. Regardless of which corner they turned, towering buildings reflected the rays of daylight into the air of every street channel. Lampposts with delicate ironwork lined the roads, their lights dormant in the daylight but ready to illuminate the streets with a warm glow come nightfall. High above, birds soared alongside the balloons, their wings brushing the currents of air in perfect rhythm with the city's quiet but ever-present pulse of life. The blend of modern and traditional wasn't just in Arcadia's buildings, but in its people and their attire as well. The majority of the population, particularly those walking the bustling streets and tending to their businesses, wore garments inspired by both classical and contemporary styles. Men donned long coats or waistcoats made from fine fabrics like linen or wool, paired with trousers that tapered slightly towards the ankle, tucked into boots or simple shoes. These coats bore subtle embroidered patterns, nods to family crests or personal symbols of Arcadian pride, though the designs remained minimalist, echoing the city's elegant restraint. Many men also sported simple hats or head coverings, whether for utility or fashion, and there was an air of casual refinement in the way they moved, confident but not boastful. Women's attire reflected the same balance. Flowing dresses, belted at the waist, made from lighter fabrics such as silk or cotton, allowed for both elegance and movement. Some women wore tunics paired with leggings or skirts, layered with shawls or scarves draped artistically over their shoulders. The traditional influence was visible in the pleats and cuts of their clothing, with earthy tones dominating the palette, soft browns, greens, and muted golds, with occasional pops of vibrant color, especially in accessories. In contrast, others embraced a more modern look, with tailored jackets, high-collared blouses, and longer skirts, the fabrics shimmering slightly with hints of metallic thread or intricate stitching. Each passerby carried a unique scent with them, and walking amidst such a crowd almost made Northern feel like he was back on Earth. He couldn't help but admire every single person that walked past, though his eyes still looked worn out. After a few minutes, they finally reached a gate nestled in the heart of a light forest. Alistron announced heartily, "Welcome to the house of the governor of Arcadia." Northern frowned. "The governor is your friend of a friend?" Chapter 535. A Group of Monsters. "It's a lot of explanation, but trust me, we can trust this guy." "Trust you? Hell nah." But it wasn't like Northern had a better solution either. Hence, as Alistron had said, they had to trust him. Maybe for my dad and Shin to give their trust. But me? I don't have enough to go around. Be it whatever will be should be, Northern was very confident it couldn't change Zilchnada from what he planned to do or wanted to do. He examined the surroundings with a sharp intensity to the depth of his gaze, then brought his beautiful eyes to Alistron. "Do what you must," he answered. "Why can't I help but turn to him as the leader of the group all the time? Shin is literally here." Alistron wondered as he knocked on the iron gate. There was something about Northern that just automatically drew attention to him. He was almost as tall as Shin, a little bit taller than Ryan. His eyes were young by physical appearance, but the depth of his gaze bathed his presence with an intense and overwhelming feeling to be revered. It didn't even seem like Northern was trying sometimes. Even when he moved slightly, Alistron would glance and almost look at him with eyes of adornment. What about him was so impressive? Even he did not have the answers, but his eyes wouldn't just look away. Sometimes it was adoration, other times it was cautiousness and curiosity.
Kang. Kang. Kang.
Alistron groaned annoyingly, shoving away his thoughts as he knocked again. "Why am I thinking about him? Don't bother, don't bother." He egged himself otherwise. Northern stood like a statue, his arms folded and eyes buried slightly beneath the fallen length of his white hair. Usually, despite their length, they were always parted, making his eyes clear to be seen, but while they were on their way, he had deliberately tousled them together to hide his eyes, because all the while he had been actively doing something. Suddenly, Northern flinched a little bit as something seemed to grab his attention, but no one else seemed to notice. "Who are you people?" A voice rolled out from behind them. Shin's eyes widened immediately. With the voice came an insanely bitter bloodlust that he couldn't help but draw his sword against. "Why?" With a swift pivoting of his body, Shin turned, using one hand to push the scabbard of his sword forward to meet the space requirement for the other hand to grab the hilt and swipe it out. All in time for him to aim his sword at the speaker's neck. Alistron had his hand stretched out. Shin's movement had been too fast for his words to even make it. Moreover, that insane speed. What was that? How is his reaction speed so fast? When did he pull the sword? Before Alistron's eyes, all that happened was a blurry turn, and the sword was right at the presence's neck. But Alistron frowned darkly as he looked at the person Shin was aiming at. "You shouldn't have done that. Not to this guy." The presence looked like a living corpse. His skin was not pale. It was white. His eyes were darkly red, with a sharp gaze that seemed to be piercing into their skulls. His hair was tousled around roughly and short. In fact, it seemed wet. And below his eyes were reddened circles, as if he had scratched that point intensely for a long period of time. There was something unsettling about him. Everything about him screamed the haste of death. In fact, in a situation like this, running would probably be a better solution. Shin's gaze was serious, unwavering, and grim. However, a line of blood suddenly appeared on his cheek, vomiting a single drop of blood that slipped down his jaw. His frown tightened more. What? When? Shin was sure he didn't see anything happen, and his gaze had been on this guy the moment he spoke. He had acted faster than anyone would. "How dare you point your sword at my neck?" the person said. His voice was like that of an arrogant 13-year-old boy, and even his look did not fall far from that tree. Alistron sighed.
I'm sorry.
"How dare you wield bloodlust against my father?" Suddenly everywhere became heavy. The air seemed to rush away in haste, and breathing became a hassle. With a calm but powerful voice, Northern commanded, "Kneel." Before a beat passed after his words, the boy felt his entire legs give out, as if a massive boulder suddenly crushed him with Northern's words. His eyes were already widened and were trembling severely. Pearls of sweat had begun to form all over his face, and his hand could not even tighten. He clenched his teeth together with a furious resolve and, with a shout, clenched his fist and smashed it into the soil. However, he suddenly stopped as water dripped on him from above. What? The boy's eyes expanded impossibly as his gaze went up. Spears of ice had spread all over him, and it seemed they had been there so long that they had begun to melt slowly under the afternoon heat. And he didn't even know where they came from. The white-haired Northern was standing behind him. He hadn't even known how that happened. He was sure he got behind everyone before anyone noticed, and yet Northern was standing behind him. There was an introverted-looking guy who stood aloof in front of the gate, not even minding what they were doing. The boy's eyes suspected for a moment if he was the one. No, he's not even looking here. It was impossible that someone would have created so many ice spears without even having to look. Hence, it had to be Northern. 1,000 thoughts raced across his mind in seconds. Something is definitely wrong with these set of people. He gritted his teeth angrily as he glared at Shin. Who are you people? Then he turned to Alistran, addressing him with a bit of familiarity. What darn monsters have you brought to my master's abode? Chapter 536. Bloodlust. Alistran was frozen in the moment, his mind trying to comprehend what he had just witnessed. He was so focused on Shin that he didn't even register Northern's movement. He never saw Northern moving, and until Northern spoke, he didn't even realize Northern was not there. And the ice spears? The boy would have gotten bombarded by them without even realizing they were coming. And yet this boy that stood amidst them was one of the most fearful and prodigious masters in the southern part of the Central Plains. A master capable of cutting with just bloodlust. The boy kneeling right there was so known to be a weapon of death that the weapon, Dead Reaper, began to follow him before the government even put a bounty of 300 million orens on him. Of course, how he is now serving the governor of Arcadia like a loyal dog is another story. But Alistran knew this guy to be one of the, if not the fastest killer he has ever met, capable of killing with just bloodlust. And yet, all this, it was unbelievable. Ice manipulation? That's an insane ability. Being able to control elemental ability was not rare, but a wide area manifestation without an already propagated force of a favorable condition was as important as a talent ability that caused one to control gravity. They were the cheat talents, undeserving to exist. The fact that a drifter has them alone made them the diamond of the market of citadels. Headmasters would sell their souls to obtain these diamonds even if it meant just displaying them on their shelf and never putting them to use. At least their talent class would be SSS. The more Alistran seemed to dwell on the thought, the more he felt himself going crazy from all the jumbo that raided his mind. He could finally now understand what Thalen meant when he said they could take care of themselves, and why he called in someone as important as him to escort them to Arcadia. That bastard! Where did he get gems like this? I'm so jealous. Alistran clicked his tongue in silence before bringing around his attention. The boy of the abode they had come to was still kneeling, gritting his teeth with his depraved eyes growing intensely madder. It didn't seem like the difficulty to breathe and weak legs would break his spirit. And that fathomed Northern. He's strong-willed. I give him that. Northern glanced down from behind the boy where he stood. He wondered a bit whether to increase the amount of the void aura he was releasing, but immediately decided that it was unnecessary. He believed he had passed the lesson he needed to pass to both of them. Averting his gaze from the boy, he glanced at Ryan and released the tense atmosphere. Suddenly, the life of the forest seemed to resume as it ought. The fresh winds seemed to sigh heavily as they could freely roam every fiber of space. The boy, as Northern dropped the void aura, instantly shot away from him, appearing inside the gate in a barely perceptible flash. Northern did not look fazed though. His eyes were still looking tired of some sort. Shin sheathed his blade. "Are you not going to take it away?" Northern grimaced at Ryan. Ryan was silent for a beat. Then his voice came, unrushing. "Until you get rid of every last drop of bloodlust in you. They are too sharp." Eh? It was the moment that Ryan spoke that Alistran and every other person realized that they had small cuts all over their body. Alistran flared, staggering back in a short frenzy as he saw the thin lines over his neck and forearms. "When did this happen? I didn't see anything?" He glanced angrily at the boy, only to realize he happened to be in the same state that they were, glazed all over with small cuts of blood, and eyes widened in realization of it. Northern scratched the back of his head in guilt, looking to one side. "I'm sorry. I didn't know it would leak out like that. Usually, one needed to be a master before they could wield bloodlust like a weapon. One also needed to be a master before they could use spiritual release, which existed as a canopy of phantasmal attacks that conjured the essence of the soul into an intangible attack. However, Northern, from mining the red crystals with bloodlust, had learned about handling bloodlust since he was a walker. Hence, when he became a master, the level to which the phantasmal attacks of bloodlust manifested was outrageous. These people, despite their soul ranks, had all been cut without even realizing it, which meant it was possible for Northern to kill someone before the person realized he was dead, which was the true meaning of a phantasmal attack that had been lost over time. The only person, however, that was without a cut was Ryan. The one Shin had noticed earlier was the one from the boy. There were several on the hand that had drawn his sword that even he did not know. None of them except Ryan perceived the attack, and that was why he had instantly deployed those ice spears towards Northern as a countermeasure. The poor boy did not know that they were not meant for him, but only directed at him because Northern was behind him. Northern closed his eyes, breathed in and out for a couple of seconds and erasing every hint of bloodlust in him. Ryan finally glanced at the ice spears and they all dissolved into cold vapors. Alistran at this point did not know what to do anymore. His face looked like he had just by luck defeated death, pale and sweaty all over. He turned to the boy behind the gate, forcing out a smile, but in his mind, "This is because you decided to be stupid, you insane dead boy. Criminal bastard. Please, can you tell the governor I am around with guests?" The boy with his unwelcoming death glare moved closer to the gate, yanking it open with frustration, his eyes gleaming at the three behind Alistran. "Come in. The governor already knows you are around. Then why did you have to cause so much unnecessary trouble? Why?" Alistran pressed down his lips to stop himself from yelling. He calmed his gaze and tried all possible best to look the part of a patient and enduring visitor. Not because he didn't want to stir any trouble with the boy, but because he didn't want to stir any trouble in the governor's house. And he really hoped Northern and Ryan also would not. "I'll have to talk to them about it later." Breathing out tiredly, he led them into the gate, treading a straight path on the paved ground in between the bamboo-like garden. Chapter 537. The Governor. As Alistran and the rest of the crew entered through the mansion's double doors, they were greeted by a lined array of workers. Ladies in black and white made uniforms bowed their heads as they entered. The smell of luxury filled the air, and the sparkling chandeliers, delicately hanging from the intricately patterned ceiling, glistened in their eyes with the pride of a peacock. Velvet carpets sprawled across the marble floor, each step sinking into the plush fabric, silencing their footsteps. The grand hall stretched far, its towering walls adorned with finely detailed tapestries depicting historical triumphs and legendary battles, their colors rich and deep as if freshly woven. To the left, a sprawling staircase of dark, polished wood and golden railings twisted upward like the tail of a sleeping dragon, leading to the mansion's upper levels. The banisters gleamed in the soft light filtering through the tall, arched windows, draped in heavy crimson curtains, adding a sense of royalty to the ambience. Along the walls, tall vases filled with vibrant bouquets of roses and lilies emitted a faint fragrance that mingled with the rich scent of polished wood and the slightest hint of lavender. The faint echo of distant music floated from somewhere deeper inside the mansion. In every corner, Statues of warriors and mythical beasts stood frozen in time, their stone gazes locked on anyone who dared meet their eyes. Every inch of the space seemed designed to inspire awe, as though the very walls whispered the prestige and power of those who called this place home. Then a well-pronounced footstep began to shake the mansion. Alistran's eyes darkened at the first step. His composure seemed to return just as the footstep began to resound. Northern, who saw him steady himself in that moment, wondered how dangerous the approaching person was. He wasn't surprised by the heavy steps. Thanks to his excellent spatial awareness, he had already assessed the person's size. But Shin and Ryan had no idea, which explained their shock as the man came into view. The man's sheer size easily dominated the room. He was a tower, standing well over 7 feet tall, with broad shoulders that seemed capable of supporting the weight of the world. With each movement of his arms and legs, his muscles strained beneath his pristine white suit, which contrasted sharply with his silver hair and beard. His features were chiseled like granite, his jawline sharp and his nose prominent, giving him a commanding presence that left no doubt about his authority. He finally stopped before all the visitors, looking down at them, the sparkle of the chandeliers dancing on his neat, slicked-back hair, which hinted at his age but did nothing to diminish the raw power he exuded. The man resembled a polar bear in human form, evoking strength, resilience, and a quiet but unmistakable danger. "I greet you all. Welcome to my home." Northern frowned tiredly as he heard the man's voice. The intensity of its thickness vibrated in his chest. "I'm beginning to develop a certain disgust and displeasure for thick voices," he thought. The man examined them all again with a cold, calculating gaze, carrying the same piercing intensity one might expect from a predator sizing up its prey. He lingered in silence before his next words reached them. "I wasn't expecting this, but since it's the Therian Citadel, I can't refuse. I do owe you all a favor after all," he said, letting out a wild, earthquaking laugh that made them shift subtly with unease. He abruptly stopped his thunderous laughter and tapped Alistran's shoulder with his huge hand. Under such a hand, Alistran's shoulder looked slender and fragile. "It's been a while since I saw you, Alistran. The maids will see you all to your rooms. Enjoy your stay." He tapped Alistran's shoulder gently again and then eventually turned around, walking back toward where he came from. The whole crew watched him leave, awe evident in their eyes. The boy, however, had his pale face flushed tomato red, and his eyes sparkled as he watched the man walk away. Is he a descendant of giants? Northern wrestled with the question for a while, his cold gaze glued to the man's enormous back. Then he turned to Alistran. "I'm sorry, who is that?" The boy grimaced at Northern and yelled, "That's the governor, you fool!" Northern's eyes widened slightly. He was shocked to his core. All the time they had been walking here, he hadn't imagined the governor to be someone like this. He had envisioned a governor as frail and weak, a mundane human, or at least a drifter who prioritized wealth over strength. There was a stereotype about how people like him looked, but this man looked nothing like a governor. One of the maids, wearing rectangular glasses, stepped forward after the governor's footsteps had faded and addressed them. "Please follow me. I will show you to your rooms. And don't you dare come out until the day you leave this castle." "Shut up, Dairy Oil," the maid commanded at once, and immediately, the boy went graveyard quiet, composed like a musical note. Northern glanced at them both, dazed. "Please follow me," she said, her voice smooth, as if it hadn't just gained a fiery tone a moment ago. Northern gulped. "I get it. I understand. These are the kinds of people you fear the most." Without further words, he obediently followed the lady up the stairs to their left. The lady took them to the next floor and showed them to their rooms, which were 10 feet apart along the same wall. Northern entered the luxurious bedroom and took a moment to breathe in the view. He glanced around with a small smile. "Crap. I love the smell of luxury. I think I love antiques too." He rushed over to the shelf on the left wall, his eyes sparkling as they scanned the series of small statues and pocket watches displayed there. An old painting on the wall depicted a bearded man riding a beast resembling a deer with branched antlers. Ah, what's it called again? Northern pondered. Crap, whatever. He rushed over to the collection of paintings hung together on the wall that framed the window. The soft, large bed dominated the room, its brown-beige color inviting and warm. He had never found himself loving a space like this one. He opened the window and leaned against it, smiling pleasantly as he felt the garden breeze brush against his hair. Then he glanced down. Oh! A woman in a white shirt tucked into black trousers and knee-high boots was swinging her sword, carefully calculating her paces. Chapter 538. Good job holding it in. Northern leaned above the window, watching as the lady moved. Her movements were gentle. Well, in his opinion, they felt too gentle. She's thinking too much. As much as it was very important for a warrior to articulate their thoughts during combat, especially when they are executing delicate combat styles, Northern, from experience, also felt that some things should be left to instincts and muscle memory rather than thought patterns and calculation. Of course, his own existence was a cheat. Every reflex, every sharp, quick, and unconventional moment he had gained in this moment was a result of the link of his body to his clone. At the early stages of his swordsmanship journey, he was no different from a squire barely able to swing a broom correctly. But because of the enforced muscle memory that he received after his clones returned to him, his abilities leaped bounds after bounds until there was not much his clones could contribute to him. At least not enough to hurt him. Hence, Northern found himself relying more on the instincts of his body gathered from experience rather than thinking too deeply. Being in a real battle won't give you that much time to think. The girl suddenly flinched as the wind blew slightly stronger than before. Northern's landing was soft, like a leaf gently, swayingly, touching the paved ground. She aimed her sword at Northern with a wary gaze darkening in her eyes. "Who are you?" Northern shrugged nonchalantly. "I'm in a good mood, so I decided to help. I'm a great swordsman. I'm sure I can be of help to you and also learn from you." The girl's composure shifted slightly. She raised her chin, looking down at Northern with a demeaning light glowing in her eyes. "That's not what I asked you. Who the hell are you?" Such vulgar words. For some reason, Northern did not feel angered in the slightest way. After so long, because of how good the room felt and the thought that he would be having a great night, he felt so relaxed emotionally. "Don't you need a training partner?" But he was still choosing to say what he wanted to say, absolutely ignoring the girl's question like her voice was not reaching him. And that was what seemed to make the girl more intensely angry. She took 2 steps forward, launching her sword towards Northern's neck and yelling her question again. "I said, who the hell are you?" Her blonde hair blazed furiously as her entire face folded into a crucible of anger. The delighted look on Northern's face at that point slowly began to dissipate. It was like reality dawned on him that he had gone ahead and stuck his nose in someone's business without the need to. What was I thinking? Did I get too excited there? He clicked his tongue in a poor letdown and turned away from the girl, trotting forward. Still, the lady was not going to have it. Her figure suddenly blurred, her sword glinting as she overtook Northern and lunged it towards his neck. This time it was closer than it had been before, resting just above his shoulder, the blade itself barely a dot away from his skin. Northern looked indifferent, unsurprised, unimpressed. The look on his face bothered the lady, such that a drop of sweat rolled down her face. She frowned, wondering, "What's with him?" Northern exhaled and slowly pushed the sword away from his neck, saying as he did, "I am sorry for startling you. I didn't mean any harm. I was intrigued by your practice, so I thought it might be a great opportunity to teach you and also learn from you." Northern was being serious. After all, there was nothing he knew of swordsmanship by the books. Whatever he had gained from experience, he wasn't even sure if it went by the fundamental rules and making of the art of close combat, most especially swordsmanship. So, in his own opinion, the girl even had more to teach him than he had to teach her. However, what the hell was that condescending gaze? "You should be lucky I'm willing to let this pass." That look the girl gave him, like he was some cockroach, did not go unnoticed. "You are still not answering the question. Who are you?" "Please, please, 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 I don't want to kill her." Northern, you must not kill her. Northern, you must not kill her. Lael, you must not kill her. Rian, Artemis. Don't you dare lay your hand on that girl. You are still silent. She was as persistent as a mosquito, glaring at Northern with a fierce look in her eyes. Northern felt his grip on his patience slipping away as the girl persistently stared at him with that rude and condescending expression. He smiled, closing his eyes, the veins on his forehead seeming to pop out. I am a guest. I really have done something wrong. You must be someone important to the governor, and touching you would mean being rude to the governor who is helping us right now. So I shouldn't touch you, right? Right? On the second right, Northern's eyes flew wide open. His eyeballs dilated, glinting with a cold and dangerous light. The girl hurried back several steps in a breath, her expression instantly crumbling to one of extreme fear and terror. Her bountiful chest rose and fell like a breathing mountain, and goosebumps crawled on her skin like 1,000 tiny snakes were walking on her at the same time. Before she could say anything, however, the man before her was gone. The curtain of the window just happened to flutter outside and danced for a moment as if a strong gust of wind passed through. The lady, still paralyzed by the fear she felt and unable to make sense of it, stared down with puzzled, widened eyes, panting. What was that? Northern, meanwhile, slumped on his bed, burying his face into the sinking mattress. That was a close one. I did well holding it in. Chapter 539. The Stealthiest Summon. Nestled upon the surface of the water was a swirling mountain, the peak of the mountain crowned by a majestic fortress, its intricate clockwork face gazing down upon the world below. The mountain, a sentinel of stone, cradled a serene lagoon, its waters shimmering like sapphires under the embrace of Daystar's light. Cascading waterfalls tumbled gracefully from the cliff's edge, at the base of the castle, their crystalline droplets scattering into rainbows as they plunged into the shimmering sapphires. Above this idyllic scene, wispy clouds drifted lazily across the vast expanse of sky, casting fleeting shadows on the land. Softly, a speckle of black dust flowed towards the castle and soon fell into the surface of the lagoon, causing a black liquid to be seen for a moment before sinking into the depths of the ocean. Following the dust, a blur whizzed past the clouds and landed on the center of the land, which was like a spiral form, with the lagoon water filling its space. The creature was pitch black, almost like a stain of evil in this serene sanctuary. It bent over the ocean with the creep and flexibility of a snake, its white eyes scrutinizing the surface of the water with innocent curiosity. After a while, the creature straightened its back and looked up at the castle. Its eyes narrowed, and with a crouch, the creature plunged into the sky, disheveling the ground beneath and causing debris of stone to fly around. Black Mamba landed on the wall of the cliff, close to the waterfall, and began to climb up. Climbing was almost like he was walking on the wall, hopping and not even diminishing his insane speed for a second. In less than 2 minutes, Black Mamba landed on the surface of the mountain and was looking at the castle. A dark frown lowered on his face, and without further ado, he vanished. His legs carried him with the lightness of a feather, and in a blur, he flew over the high castle wall, landing inside without a sound. The creature glanced left and right before darting towards the yard of the castle. There he saw an open door behind the castle and, without much thought, entered. Black Mamba practically merged with the darkness as he walked down the stairs. About 100 steps later, he arrived at an underground. The place was eternally dark, making Black Mamba's eyes glint with an incandescent white light. It was as if the veils of darkness themselves had opened their eyes. The creature walked forward without producing a single step, his eyes focused, narrowed, and glued to a certain goal. After more steps in a couple of minutes, Black Mamba stood before a tall, crimson door. He slowly sized up the wooden door, only to flinch suddenly and disappear into the darkness. A couple of seconds later, the door began to powerfully creak open, shards of stone falling from the roof as if it had been locked for centuries. A man with long, black wet hair staggered out of the room. He was pale and skinny. A black coat lazily hung over his shoulders. However, doing nothing to conceal his dry chest and revealing ribs. The man let out a guttural cry and punched the door. Despite his frail-looking body, webbed cracks instantly appeared on the part of the door he punched. He staggered a bit more as he tried to walk forward. His monolid eyes were filled with boiling hatred. He gritted his teeth as he leaned on the open door with one hand. "I will find you, and I will make sure I kill you." For a moment after hearing those words, Black Mamba moved slightly. His fingers extended and lustrous black claws curved out. "Follow it. Do not engage and do not be detected." Northern's words rang in the creature's mind, causing him to hide back his claws and retreat into the darkness before disappearing. "So, that's what you saw." Northern sat on the white throne, leaning tiredly on one armrest of it as Black Mamba divulged non-verbally all that he had witnessed. Night Terror and Revant were both standing beside Black Mamba, on the left and right respectively. Revant, after spending a few days in solitary, now had a well-composed facial expression, although Northern noticed him glancing at Black Mamba with an indescribable disgust. His pride is just too much, which was quite understandable. Revant was a tyrant. Northern had never met one, didn't even know how they existed or what they looked like, but he assumed that they were a pinnacle of existence, and that alone was bound to give them a heart of pride that matched the level of their superiority. "Well, I will worry about that dude later. I am still very interested in his talent, after all. But I have more pressing matters." Northern leaned away from one hand, sitting equally on the brilliant mantle. He looked over at all three of them before he started to talk. "So, I have been thinking of something recently. I want to bring more order to this place." He paused, taking a breath before he continued. "Before I do that, however, there are a few people that I want you all to acknowledge." In a far, unseeable distance, the door to the Void Palace creaked open, pale light peeping through. Two long shadows could be seen growing longer as steps resounded in the hall, eventually becoming shorter as the owners of the steps revealed themselves. One was a lady with black shadows around her eyes, a melancholic face framed by tousled, chestnut hair that fell in short waves around her face. Her gaze was steady, quiet, and brimming with a twisted determination. The other was a man with sharp and intense features, exuding an aura of raw defiance and untamed emotion. His dirty, ashen hair fell unevenly across his forehead, partially obscuring his eyes that burned with a cold, smoldering intensity. His eyes were fierce and unyielding, as if harboring secrets and pain that pierced through anyone who met his gaze. Northern smiled as both Jeskai and Linus reached his front, standing next to Night Terror. Then he remembered. "Oh, Mr. Fluffy." With a snap of his finger, the monstrous beast appeared in an instant. Northern's eyes widened as they fell on the beast. Chapter 540, The First Step. It made Northern's widened eyes sparkle with surprise. His mind faltered, unable to piece words together. Wah! Mr. Fluffy was standing on two bipedal legs, almost like Night Terror. His white fur seemed like it was cut directly from a slab of moonlight. They fluffed and danced with every stray pass of the wind. The beast had an intense, fiery, and at the same time, familiar ferociousness in its eyes. Although those eyes were now starkly different than before. It was like an abominable creature that existed only in fairy tales, standing almost 7 feet tall, every part of its skin coiling with metal-like muscles. His pale eyes against the drop of his white sheen fur were striking. It, for a moment, made the beast look harmless, rather stunningly beautiful. "Mr. Fluffy." A wide grin formed on Mr. Fluffy's face. However, it looked like the devil was trying to smile. It would have made a little girl pee her pants. Northern, however, was not even concerned about the awkward grin on the beast's face. Instead, monster profile, name, Mr. Fluffy, true name, Silver Moon, rank, beast, danger level, devil, attributes, Call of the Wild, Call of the Moon, abilities, cleave. Northern leaned back, his eyes frozen with paling surprise. A devil? How did he become a devil? It was not out of place for some monsters to become different after evolving to a new danger level. After all, Night Terror had also evolved to Dark Terror at the last minute. So this wasn't strange at all. But the pale shock on Northern's face told a different story. The last time I remember, wasn't he just a disaster level? It seemed Mr. Fluffy had taken a tremendous leap in danger level. Was that what he was doing at the Glacier Mountain? Northern suddenly frowned. But wait, wouldn't he have needed a tremendous amount of soul cores for that to be possible? His eyes widened even more. Please don't tell me this bastard has been consuming the section of soul cores that I left at the Glacier Mountain. That had to be it. There was no other explanation for Mr. Fluffy's sudden growth. He had deliberately hidden himself in the Glacier Mountain and was consuming tons upon tons of soul cores, causing him to evolve several times in danger level. Now, he showed up in front of Northern like he had done some great job, head high with a terrorizing, ugly smile on his animalistic face. Northern washed his face with one hand, sighing. He would have consumed a lot of soul cores for that to happen. He wanted to get angry, but he couldn't. He also felt bad that he had been neglecting the monster's growth recently. Mr. Fluffy had been his first buddy, the one monster that had been there from the beginning, and yet the one that got less attention from him. I can't imagine how he must have felt. He must have wanted to be stronger, to be seen. Hence, consuming those soul cores and believing he could be stronger. He might have cost Northern some losses in soul cores, but he had good intentions. Northern glanced at the monster once again before looking away with an exasperated sigh. He leaned on the armrest with his elbow and rested his head, looking at Mr. Fluffy again. He did go ahead and become a werewolf, huh? Northern's gaze lazily drifted off the beast and went to the others standing. Who have I not called yet? Corpse Eater. He snapped his fingers and immediately, the devilish Corpse Eater, placed in charge of managing the general workforce of monsters, suddenly appeared before Northern. There were still 3 void summons left, but Northern felt it was unnecessary to summon them since they weren't that much of a sentient being. He was going to use them to propagate the rest of the summons he got from Soultaker Shattering. He paused for a moment, looking down in thought. Should I just do that before doing this? A bead of sweat rolled down his face as he thought of the process. Weaving souls together and creating a new form of existence from the depths of the void wasn't as easy as it seemed. It was soul and stamina exhausting. The more he did it, the more he felt like he would lose his hang of it. So Northern felt it was an art that he should reserve for really extreme purposes. But those souls are quite valuable. They'd be a great boon to my force. He was somehow in a dilemma. Should he go ahead and do what he wanted to do without creating a body for them? Or should he go ahead and create them, knowing very well that some repercussion of some sort would hit him? He was deep in thought, while they all stood opposite him in total silence. Amidst it all, Northern suddenly remembered the precious ability he had received. His eyes glowed. That's right. I don't have to use them as soldiers. There's Soul Forge. A satisfied grin appeared on Northern's face. Then I can carry along with this. Northern stood up, a pleased smirk adorning his face. He majestically walked through the flames and stopped in front of it, about 30 steps away from them. Then he started. I want to set a hierarchy. He observed all their faces for a moment. And there was no emotional response, no change in facial expression, not even from Mr. Fluffy. Did they all expect this? He breathed softly and continued. I really don't want to do this. As much as I would love equality to reign amongst all of you, that would be wishful thinking, and wishful thinking is the value of a naive person. In the end, causing utter ruin to one's fate. His eyes went over all of them with a cold light gleaming out of it. I am currently suspecting that the enemies I will be going toe-to-toe with in the future are ones that no ordinary drifter would be able to face off with, which is why I want to make you extraordinarily strong, insanely strong. Hierarchy is the first step for that to be decided. His voice paused, causing absolute silence to instantly settle in the vast hall. Then, like a ghostly blade, it cut through the silence. And how would this rank be decided? It's simple. A vicious grin curved the corners of Northern's lips. Duel.